You're listening to That's Pretty Dark,
the podcast where we talk about all of the entertainment that scared us as children
and still haunts us as adults. So grab your flashlight and join us as we take a frightfully nostalgic look over our shoulders.
And under our beds.
And in our closets.
And together we'll realize, whoa, that's pretty dark.
Pretty dark.
I'm so psyched. I've psyched myself into this in a really awkward way.
You're psyched in.
I'm psyched in, but not in like the way I wish I was, just more in like a really intimidated way. You know, I'm being really vulnerable here. Today is a really vulnerable day for me, this episode. And with that being said, I guess I should tell you guys that we are doing another movie night episode, and it's all about all dogs go to heaven.
Do they?
Do they?
Do they, though?
Do they? I don't know.
That's the question.
That is the question we're going to answer today.
Once a dog, always a dog?
I think that's true.
Different question.
Different question, probably the same answer. Yeah, so we're going to get really philosophical today. I'm going to bring up a lot of my past trauma. It's going to be really fun. A good time. It's going to be a blast.
Yeah, I'm pumped.
And I'm excited to cover this one because it's widely, not just by me, but by the internet at large, it's considered one of the most disturbing children's movies of all time.
I would say so. It brought up a lot of questions in my mind. I remember asking my mom a lot of deep philosophical questions for a child.
Yeah. And I mean, kids are already really good at that, but then you put something like this in front of them. And it's interesting because you ask the questions. I didn't have to ask questions. I knew the answers and I wished that I didn't.
Oh.
And that's how my upbringing
How did you know?
went.
Tell us.
Oh.
We all want to know.
Religious trauma.
Religious trauma.
That's going to be a major theme for us today. And yeah, take a shot every time I say the words religious trauma today. Sorry about it.
It's a drinking game. We all need a drink to get through this one.
I don't think you want to do that. But, you know, we're here to talk about the dark things, and this film is just dark all the way around.
Yeah.
So of course it has a place on our podcast, and of course it belongs.
Our podcast called That's Pretty Dark.
It's called That's Pretty Dark, if you didn't know. And my name is Kaylin Andrews.
My name's Christian Mott.
And that's Christian
We're
Mott.
going the full names today.
I don't know. Like I said, it feels big. It feels important.
This is Miss Andrews and Mr. Mott
coming at you. So yeah, let's talk about Don Bluth, because this is the first Don Bluth movie that we're covering. So I just thought I would give you, I don't know how much you know about him already, Christian.
Absolutely nothing.
Really? Okay, well then perfect.
I have no idea who this person is.
Are you kidding me?
I'm learning a lot on this podcast.
I mean, I am too. I think it's
amazing how far I've gotten in life without knowing certain things.
I do wonder sometimes with you. So it's perfect. You're going to learn something today, and
every week.
Hopefully other people are too, and it's going to be fun.
I strive to learn something every day.
Well, Don Bluth is a big name in animation, and I'm not going to say he's second only to Disney, but he's one of the primary figures in animation in general. He got a start in animation after he graduated college. He was actually an assistant animator on Sleeping Beauty in 1957. And then he took a break from animating, and this is going to come back later, but he took a break from animating and served as an LDS missionary.
LDS,
so he did his missions.
Latter-day Saints.
Formerly known as Mormon Church. That's not what they would like to be referred to as now.
We're going to call them Mormons.
The LDS faith has you, I don't know how much you know about that either.
The entire Last Podcast on the Left series on Mormonism.
Oh, okay. Well then, yeah. They place a big emphasis on like missionary work and sharing like your testimony and all that stuff. Yeah. So he did leave animation briefly to serve 2 missions. Then he went back to school after that, and he earned a degree in English.
Okay.
I don't know if it was like trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his life, or he didn't want to go back into animation. I have no idea, but it always feels like it was a calling for him. Everything I found about his early life is like he would watch movies and like draw based on those movies. And then obviously he was in there in the early days of Disney as well.
Was he already LDS, or did he?
I think he grew up LDS.
Okay. I guess that's how it works usually.
Most of the time.
It happens.
A lot of people do convert, but yeah. But he returned to Disney in 1971. And while he was at Disney, he worked on Robin Hood, Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2, The Rescuers, and he directed animation for Pete's Dragon.
Wow, I loved Pete's Dragon.
So you can kind of imagine the same style of animation in all of those things, I'm sure.
I wondered if All Dogs wasn't a Disney movie, because the animation was so similar to a lot of like the characters that I know of. Maybe I just know Bluth movies.
Oh, we'll get into some of that too. We absolutely will get into some of that.
Okay.
It was all Bluth, but some of them were also Disney because he worked for Disney for a time.
Yeah.
But in 1979, he teamed up with Gary Goldman and John Pomeroy, and there were like 9 people who left Disney and joined him at his own studio that he called Don Bluth Productions.
Wow.
So he felt like he wanted to revive the way that they had animated in the early classics, and he didn't love the way Disney was progressing or moving.
Yeah.
And so he just said, about face, let's do this. So he did The Secret of Nim, which I don't know if you've seen that or know of that, but I'm sure we can go into that one too. It's also one of the darker children's movies of the time.
All right, we'll add it to the list.
Don Bluth is honestly a big reason we have this podcast.
Okay.
Because even if he didn't directly work on other films like Once Upon a Forest and other dark children's movies like that, he set the tone, I feel like, for a lot of that heavy emotional content.
Because this is like 80s when he made All Dogs.
Correct.
So he was a little bit before the 90s Renaissance.
Yeah, I think he jump-started it.
Sweet.
But this is another interesting fact, and since you don't know who he is, you might not find this as interesting as I did, but shout out there if you do know who Don Bluth is. Did you know that he spent most of the early 80s creating one of the most famous arcade games of all time, Dragon's Lair?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he created Dragon's Lair.
I find that interesting.
He animated it. And again, if you had a similar childhood to ours, you can close your eyes and you can see that animation style. And it is all so consistent. And I feel like the people that worked with him or the people that he taught, everybody had such a similar philosophy to how to like hand draw things. And the way everything feels so tactile, it's just really like distinct.
Yeah.
So we'll get into more of that too. I have a lot to say about Don Bluth, have a lot to say about animation, and have a lot to say about emotion. So we're going to just cover the whole gambit today.
Welcome to your weekly therapy session. So
he ended up filing bankruptcy after Secret of Nim. So his studio went under. It was no more.
Gotcha.
And then he created Dragon's Lair, and he worked with those same people, plus a businessman. I can't remember his name. Sullivan, last name. But to open another studio, Sullivan Bluth Studios. And that's the studio he opened in 1985. And that's the studio that worked on All Dogs Go to Heaven.
Gotcha.
So this is the studio that moved to Ireland to take advantage of like government tax breaks. Then he caught the attention of Steven Spielberg, and they teamed up on American Tail.
Okay.
And Land Before Time.
Wow.
So
Land Before Time.
Don Bluth is the father of dark, emotional children's content. Yeah, and Steven Spielberg had a big hand in that
about
too.
Some traumatizing cartoons.
So Land Before Time was what he had just come off of.
Okay.
And this brings us to All Dogs Go to Heaven. So All Dogs Go to Heaven was released 32 years ago, almost to the day of like this month, November 17th, 1989. And I'll give you a second because I know that makes you feel really, really old.
I sure do.
But it was co-distributed by Fox and MGM. And it was actually released the same week as Disney's The Little Mermaid.
No way.
They were released at the same time, so they were kind of competing.
Yeah.
And
Mutiny turned rivalry.
Right. All Dogs didn't do as well at the box office. And a lot of people attribute it to the fact that it came out right at the same time as Little Mermaid.
That makes a lot of sense.
But all hope was not lost for All Dogs because it was released, just at the beginning of this VHS like home video heyday.
Oh, yeah.
So it did super,
years.
super well on home video.
Wow.
And although it's not still one of the highest grossing VHS releases or like home video releases, it did really well. And it was one of the highest at the time that it was released.
In my memory, like everybody had seen it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
but that could also just be because we grew up in religious circles.
I think you're right.
So all of us were like, heaven?
Yeah.
You mean heaven's in the title? Okay, every child needs to watch this. Because they just implicitly trusted other adults to teach their children about all kinds of things that they shouldn't have been teaching them.
And I don't know why that was, to be honest. I don't know why that was. But yes, I do think you're right. I think that a lot of religious circles really ran with this movie, and growing up in the Bible Belt where we both grew up, that made a lot of sense.
But if they'd ever known he was Mormon,
I know, right? They probably would
shun the non-believer.
And we'll get into a little bit of discussion about different Christian denominations. But for the most part, in the South, you got the Southern Baptists and other like Protestant, very different from LDS.
Yeah.
Most of the time, not to say there aren't charismatic denominations in the South, but even still, you get into the way more like conservative, not as many like Episcopalian, Pentecostal, not as many of those churches in our area. So there was a bubble for sure.
Yes.
In terms of like theology. But sorry if that's boring to you because there's going to be a lot of that coming up, but hopefully.
We're not apologizing. Let's be clear.
Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't apologize because I have a lot to say and it's really important.
Yeah.
But now I guess we can kind of get into the film, like the plot of the film. It's set in 1939 New Orleans. Our heroes are Charlie Barkin, and he's like, I'd call him enterprising, a German Shepherd mix, and Itchy Ford is his name. This really thoughtful, careful dachshund as his sidekick. They embark on escapades.
Emphasis on the bark.
They embark on escapades such as stealing an orphan named Anne-Marie, who can talk to animals, from Charlie's former business partner, and then they earn a fortune betting on those animals, and then they open their own casino. But before any of that can happen, Charlie is killed by the aforementioned partner, like his gambling partner.
He is murdered.
Because that partner wants the business all to himself.
Yeah.
And this guy is a bulldog. And I found it interesting that the like movie case, like the back case, said that they called him a pit bull.
Interesting.
But he's very clearly like an American bulldog.
Yeah.
I mean, like he doesn't look like a pit bull.
I don't know a thing about dogs or cars or anything that people usually know about.
I don't know anything about cars.
I got nothing.
I had books on dog breeds. I studied dog breeds. Like that was my thing. Mostly because I really wanted a dog and my parents didn't. So I didn't get one until I was like 12 or 13.
I was kind of surprised when I pulled it up to watch it. The description of the movie said, a murdered dog.
Yes.
I was like, whoa. Murder?
Yep.
In a kid's movie?
There is murder. Murder abounds in this movie.
Lots of death. Lots of very adult themes.
Very just intense adult themes.
Extraordinarily adult. Very worldly themes, if you will.
Secular, almost, you could say.
Almost.
But yeah, this bulldog, pit bull bulldog, is named Carface. And Charlie ends up sneaking back to Earth from heaven, and that's when all of that aforementioned stuff happens. And we've talked before about like how some kids are almost psychologically predisposed to fall in love with anthropomorphic animals. And I was one of those children. That was very essential to my childhood. I loved animals so much.
Yeah.
And this is one of the strongest examples of that in my memory. Like I was in love with these dogs. I wanted a dog so bad. And so they felt so real to me. And I think a lot of that is due to like Don's philosophies and the way that he animated and the way that he thought about animation. And the animals always felt like so cuddly and like tangible, even in the midst of all this like dark, macabre stuff.
Right.
He had a very specific way that he thought about animation. And I think that carried through in a lot of this.
Yeah.
And speaking again of the animation, from Dawn Studio in Ireland, it took about 350 animators almost 2 years to hand draw All Dogs Go to Heaven. There were over 1 million drawings as part of the production.
Jeez.
And there were interviews that I found, like as Don was building the production studio and he was working on this movie, he mentioned the importance of having animators who also think of themselves as actors.
Interesting.
Because they have the same job as actors, which he said is to move the hearts and emotions of the audience. I think this philosophy has a lot to do with why his films feel like especially prone to really tug at your heartstrings or like absolutely rip them to shreds.
Yeah.
Every gesture, every frame was supposed to carry emotion and, emphasize the character. Every frame was important in acting out who the character was, what they thought, what they believed.
That's something I've always noticed in animation in general. You know really good animation when the characters are like fluid with their movements and their expression and their how they gesture and do things.
And consistent.
It's consistent. And then there's a lot of like other their expression is something there's less than human. There's less
than human, I think is a good way to put it. It's less than human. It doesn't feel as honest or genuine.
Right.
And it's funny to say that about a kid's movie about animated dogs. But that's the whole idea, is that Don took that to the next level and made it feel real.
That's
to the point where even this week as I was watching, I had trouble, cried a lot.
Right.
Don was also quoted in one of the behind-the-scenes specials saying that he loves animated movies because they allow him to visit a world that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And personally, I found that really ironic coming from him because all of his movies are so dark and gritty, and they feel like they're bringing the real world to animation and not the other way around.
Yeah, that is a fun distinction.
And that's unique to him. A lot of animated movies do transport you to somewhere else. And his movies, I feel like, always really grounded you in where we are. The reality.
It's like an excess of reality.
It's an excess. That's a great way to put it too. It's an excess of reality. So I was like, Don, what do you mean? you took us to, the depths of society.
Yeah.
All of his worlds feel, very down to earth, but not always in a great way.
Yeah.
Like I said, the main character of this movie is killed by his gambling partner. And that was just like the minimum summary of the plot. But I think that also did help to make things more tangible, and in combination with the gritty storyline and the hand-drawn animation, you put it together and it's just so visceral. In terms of the aesthetic that Don Bluth creates, I'm really a big fan of this animation style. Like, I'm not the biggest animation person even.
I love it.
But this style of animation, this hand-drawn Don Bluth style, is one of my favorites. Like, I just prefer it for whatever reason.
This would be like the on-brand animation of my childhood memory, and there's other kinds of off-brand animation that don't quite cut it.
Yeah. He made the mold.
It was the standard.
And even like the landscapes in this movie, like I remember in my mind the landscape, seeing the New Orleans city with the moon over top of it.
It's beautiful.
It always stood out to me just as really pretty. But this is another interesting thing that I learned in researching. You know how the whole movie looks kind of dingy?
Yeah.
And like dirty?
Yeah.
I always assumed it's like green-brown, a lot of green-brown colors. I know Christian has colored films.
Yeah.
So always kind of looking at color and the science of color. I'm not great at it, but even I could tell this movie has always had this like green-brown hue to the whole thing. That wasn't intentional.
It wasn't.
It was not.
Okay.
So it was really murky, and like, all, you know, the scene with all the puppies, they were always like a little bit off.
Yeah.
Like very desaturated.
Yeah.
I thought it was a choice, but shocked to learn it wasn't. Apparently, very few people have actually ever seen this film with the correct color timing, color grade, because Don's team originally engaged Technicolor. Again, they like set the standard in the industry at the time.
Yeah.
And they had this really vivid, correct color time print for the film in general. And Goldcrest, the studio that they were working with to distribute the film, didn't want to pay the price tag of Technicolor prints for all of the distribution that they were doing.
Interesting.
So they ended up going with a lower quality print lab to make the prints back in the day, you know, when you were printing animated movies. And this lab provided a screening for like the crew in Ireland. They provided the print for that. And apparently when Don left that screening, he was like, what the hell was that? What the hell did I just watch, basically? Yeah. And the next night, or like very soon after that, they had a royal premiere, like a screening in London. And he provided his own Technicolor print for that, or he had Technicolor provide a print for that on his own. Like he specifically, his team called them and said, we have to have this.
Yeah.
And they came, the Technicolor team, at the last minute that night and brought the prints to that screening.
Wow.
So those people at that screening are some of the only people in the world that have ever seen this movie the way it was intended to be seen.
The way Bluth intended.
Yes, because after that, Don, like Gary, Don's partner, he begged like the executives at Goldcrest to work with Technicolor for the rest of the prints in their distribution, and it was too expensive and they didn't want to. They said no, they didn't do it.
Okay.
So they continued to engage this lower quality lab for everything that they did, like theaters and home video.
All right, so to clarify, when they had the crew screening, it was not the correct color.
Correct. Was not correct.
Is that what we're watching now?
That is what we're watching now.
It's amazing that they haven't had like a re-release of like the correct color.
They talked about that on the internet. The consensus is kind of that they don't exist anymore. There were so few of the Technicolor prints made. Yeah. Either they don't exist or they're lost. So they're still kind of holding out hope that one day somebody will find a copy and it will be released as it was intended, but none of us would even recognize it at this point because we all know it as that dingy, dark, murky movie.
Yeah, I think it kind of was fate. I think fate decided.
Yeah, I think so too. For whatever reason, that's just how the chips fell. Yeah. And now that's how we know it, and I think it enhanced all of the darkness that was already present in the film. Cool. It was always dark in my mind because of the subject matter anyway. Yeah. And rewatching it was all really desaturated and everything, but I feel like it was still so tactile. And one of the things I remember about how tactile it felt was like Charlie's cab and how comfortable it looked to me all my life.
I noticed that too.
And I just like wanted to curl up in that car like forever.
That stood out to me.
That was all I wanted.
Yeah.
I had like all these little like animal figurines as a kid. Like I was one of those kids because I became a writer, or I wanted to write. So I was always creating storylines in my head. And so I had all these figurines. And I remember the emphasis that I had probably after watching this movie on like creating this den, like a really cozy place for all of them to be. And I think that came from this, honestly. And not only did it feel cozy in its darkness, the food in this movie always looked so delicious. Oh. The pizza and the waffles.
The waffles, yes.
Man, it always just looks so delicious. And that's a like common thing that I've heard in talking with people about this film is just how much they wanted to eat everything that was in this movie. And I don't know why it was like that, but it just felt good.
It's like the pizza in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I mean,
yeah, it just always. But if you say like the words cartoon pizza to me, I instantly see all the puppies like splitting out the pizza, and it just looked so good.
Charlie! Pizza!
And speaking of the pizza, we can't get away from talking about the film in general without mentioning the music.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for musicals. Normally, I love musicals. And some of these songs stuck with me, like You Can't Keep a Good Dog Down, I really liked, which is with Charlie and Itchy when they first come back to the casino. Let Me Be Surprised, which is the song that Charlie and the Whippet Angel sang when Charlie first goes to heaven. Mm-hmm. And obviously the sharing song with the pizza.
Yeah.
Always loved all of those, and a lot of them are sung in the round, and that I also really like things that are sung in the round, probably because I am ADHD. The stimulation, like it gives me something to keep focusing on.
Right.
Those songs I liked, and I don't know that this is really like a hot take, but I think a lot of the other songs in this movie kind of fall short, and they didn't stick with me. Yeah, they didn't stick with me the same way that others from the time period did, such as Oliver and Company. Right. I know every word to every song from Oliver and Company.
The music in that movie is fantastic.
I love it.
But I was wondering, is this going to be a musical? I don't even remember. Mm-hmm. I couldn't recall. Yeah. Probably because I don't like the music in this movie.
And it's funny because normally when I think of cartoons, I go to the music instantly. We've already been there with Ferngully, you know? Mm-hmm. I think it's something that really helps it cement in my memory. But yeah, this one,
I think it falls short.
Some of the songs I liked, but I still didn't know all the words. And I'm the type of person that knows all the words to everything I've ever heard. Mm-hmm. And I didn't remember the words to any of these songs.
My least favorite was the Crocodile song.
Mine too. And we will absolutely get there.
Okay, we'll get there.
I have a lot to say about the Crocodile.
Yeah, I'm going to be jumping ahead to a lot of points.
But I think that's a consensus. I think that's everybody's least favorite. Okay. I have some fun facts to share with you that I think are going to make you, they're just going to surprise you. But I'll let you be surprised to bring it back to the movie. I'll let you be surprised.
Don't tell me how to feel.
Oh, I don't have to. I'm predicting how you're going to feel.
That's fair.
One of the reasons that I think the music feels disjointed in this movie is because apparently there were two separate people writing the lyrics. So some songs are written by one person and some were written by another. So it doesn't really have the cohesiveness that a lot of animated films do when it comes to a soundtrack. So it felt disjointed, so it was harder to remember it in sequence or remember it all together. Yeah. And personally, of the two, I think the sequel had a stronger soundtrack. But even still, I don't remember all the words to the soundtrack from the sequel. But we'll talk about that one day.
Yeah.
Before I go into the cast, I'm going to give my disclaimer right here. I'm going to give my trigger warning right here.
Right up top.
About my personal connections to this movie. It absolutely messes with my head more than anything I watched as a child. It is number one on my list in terms of what really messed me up. Mm-hmm. And even to this day, I have to be in a very specific, solid state of mind to attempt to rewatch this movie. I can't just turn it on.
Yeah.
This week, I turned it on for the first time in a long time, but I had to time out when I watched it based on how I was feeling, how my mental health was, because I knew I couldn't handle it if I wasn't careful.
Right.
And I almost didn't even still. Sometimes I can't make it through this entire movie. I have to turn it off halfway through. And like I mentioned a couple times, I spent a lot of this week just crying.
Yeah, you were telling me about it.
Yeah, I was texting Christian. I was like, this movie, I've cried 4 times this week about this movie. And I don't cry that often, but it just brought up a lot of triggering things for me.
Yeah.
And in the place that I am in my life now, my opinions are a lot different. It's probably the first time I've watched it since kind of outgrowing a lot of the things that I felt when I was younger. Not even just as a child, but as a teenager, young adult, a lot of the beliefs that I held really tightly.
Yeah.
This is probably the first time I've watched it as I've learned and grown a little bit out of some of those things.
Deconstructed a little bit.
Deconstructed a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit of what I used to think and feel. And I think that's important for anybody that's, an adult that has any type of faith or, anything that you believe or was ingrained in you from a young age. It's important to take a step back and look at it objectively and say, okay, why do I think this? What are the sources? Can we trace this back a little bit? So yeah, I've been deconstructing quite a bit over the past few years. And so this is the first time I've watched this movie through that lens. So I had a lot of pent up stuff.
Yeah. This holds some deep-seated trauma for you, for sure, the way you've been talking about it.
Yeah. Very, very deep-seated trauma.
Yeah.
So, and not only that, not only was it just traumatic for me as a kid watching this movie, I respect Don for like wanting to make his movies emotional, and like he did it better than almost anybody else, and I think he did a great job. But in my very biased opinion, there was no reason to make these movies this sad.
I know.
There's just no reason for it.
Right.
He went over above and beyond, and there was just no reason to make them this sad. This is one of the saddest children's movies.
Yeah.
In addition to the dark subject matter, it's just sad.
It's a sad movie.
Yeah.
Do you think that was this overcompensation in an attempt to figure out how to make this make-believe sort of medium, this animation, real?
Maybe. I mean, he had worked on Disney movies, but it's only his second movie on his own. So he did American Tail and Land Before Time with Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
So this is only his second foray as his own vision for the entire film.
Yeah.
So yeah, it may just be like a trial and error kind of thing.
He was just trying to do it, but then he did it to us too hard.
Right? It's like the professor is mixing up the Powerpuff Girls, and you just accidentally pour way too much of one thing in there.
Too many tears.
Whoop.
Too many children's tears.
That's how I see this. It was just overcompensated.
That's wild. Okay, cool.
So if you are also deconstructing or going through dealing with any of your religious trauma, and you might find this movie triggering too, just know we're going to hold hands. We're going to get through it together. It's going to be okay. And if you don't have those beliefs, or you didn't, grow up the same way, thank you for opening your mind and learning about how it was for us. I think that's also really valuable. Yeah. So I appreciate you. And thanks for joining on this journey.
A little inside look.
Okay, so let's talk about the cast. You want to talk about the cast?
Yeah. Tell me who voiced these people.
The late, great Burt Reynolds voices the charismatic Charlie V. Barkin. Years before All Dogs Go to Heaven was a thing, Burt came to Don and said, I really want you to animate me as an asshole junkyard dog. And Don was like, yeah, that sounds great. And so they started together creating this Private Eye character that was a dog.
Okay.
And that character never really saw the light of day, but it became the basis for Charlie Barkin, which I think is really funny. Make me an asshole junkyard dog, please. And Don's like, okay, one asshole junkyard dog coming up.
That's perfect.
And Don also shared that they based a lot of not only the style of the dog and the way that he moved in his gestures, but also the personality of Charlie. They based it around Burt himself.
That's so funny.
And the more that he put on and acted, the more they were like, no, don't do that. Just be yourself.
Yeah, wow.
Dial it back and just be who you are, which I think is fun.
Yeah. I had to look him up because the voice was so familiar, and it wasn't who I was thinking of.
Oh, yeah.
But I was like, Burt Reynolds, okay. I feel like this is a precursor to having George Clooney voice Mr. Fox.
Yeah, honestly.
Fantastic Mr. Fox. Because I was like, it basically is the same style.
You take a really big star and you put him in an animated movie.
Well, they have a very similar persona. Just that kind of charming, super understated, charismatic, and their voices are very similar, and they're just playing themselves as
with a dash of arrogance in the pot.
They're very arrogant. Of course they are, but that's part of the personality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found Charlie very charming.
Oh, me too. Absolutely, of course. He's so any smooth talking character, I'm always so intrigued by, and honestly kind of in love with, because I don't understand how to do that. Mm-hmm. So anytime anybody can be very really charismatic and have the things just come to them, and God, I'm just jealous of it.
It's a bit beyond our reach.
Yeah.
And thanks for listening to our podcast.
Yeah. But
Lord.
Burt began acting in the 60s and rose to fame in titles such as Gunsmoke, Deliverance, Smokey and the Bandit. I'm absolutely reducing him by not describing more of what he's done, but there's so many things, and I feel like everybody kind of knows who he is.
Cool Burt.
Almost every source that I looked at called him a sex symbol.
Okay.
And he posed for I think Cosmopolitan. He leaned into that a little bit.
Sure.
So it made me feel a little less bad for always having had a crush on Charlie Barkin.
Yeah, part of his brand.
He, despite his moral failings as a character, he was just so charming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that highlights a lot of my problems I've had in my life anyway. But
we'll talk a lot about animated animals that we were strangely attracted to as children.
There are so many. And they did it on purpose. It's not that we were unique.
It was
in
done
that.
on purpose.
They were designed that way.
Yeah. They were made
for sure.
Strangely human and sexy.
Yeah. Yeah, and sexy. Sexy was the way to go
Sexy
if you were unsure.
cartoons.
And it's kind of funny, if you look back at a lot of these not everything, but a lot of these kids animated movies, they were in one of two categories. They were either like really sexy or they were itchy. You know, they were short and stout and not.
Pretty much.
There was like a pretty strong distinction. Nobody was really in the middle.
Itchy the character.
Itchy the character. Yeah. Not itchy, like itchy.
Itchy people. I was like, interesting way to put, got it.
And speaking of itchy, another friend of Don Bluth's and another co-star to Bert, he'd been in several things with Bert already. Dom DeLuise voiced Charlie's little sidekick, Itchy. Don also, I'm going to go back and forth. I did it all week. Dom featured in The Secret of Nim, Don's first film, as well as Cannonball Run with Bert and other titles like Haunted Honeymoon, Blazing Saddles, and a lot of other like really campy 70s and 80s cult classic type movies. Yeah. However, I best know Dom and his voice from Oliver and Company, which came out the year prior in 1988, because he voiced Fagin in Oliver and Company. Wow. And he actually wasn't in Don's Land Before Time movie because they were being made at the same time, and he was working on Oliver and Company.
Gotcha.
And I've also always really loved the Itchy character because he kind of represents those of us that aren't as charming and charismatic, and he's the anxious, thoughtful, like trying to keep everybody out of trouble character. But in this movie, I feel like Don really did justice to that character because it proves that we can also be like resourceful and intelligent and heroic despite all of those things.
Yes.
So I liked that aspect of the character.
Yeah, it's a good word, Don. Good word.
Good word. And another kind of fun fact about recording, Bert and Dom recorded their parts together, like in the studio together.
That makes sense.
And that's not typical of animation. It's definitely not unheard of, but it's not the typical way you would do things. Normally you'd have everybody in like, you know, the sound booth by themselves.
Right.
If I was going to direct an animated movie, my first order of business would be getting everybody together in the studio.
Right. Absolutely.
That I just think it makes the chemistry so much better and the energy so much better. But it isn't, for some reason, the default. And so they worked together because they requested to. And I think it was important to Don. But a lot of the dialogue between the two of them was improvised. Wow. They did a lot of it just ad lib. And Don ended up liking what they did a lot better than what he had scripted.
Nice.
They actually asked him to leave the room when they were recording so that they could just like get in the zone a little bit better and not feel watched. And he was like, sure.
I get
like
that.
He obliged because he trusted them. And they had the chemistry.
That's the kind of experience I long for.
I know, me too.
It's just to know each other so well and to just everybody has a hand in creating it. I would lose my mind if I was Don Bluth because I'd be like, I need to be in the room controlling you and telling you what to do. Yeah. But I would be,
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't as a director, like having directed things. No, that's like ideal for me. I'm like, yes, please. Like, if I know that I can see that you have the chemistry, if I'm worried about it, then no, I want to be there.
And these are all professionals so that they know what they're doing.
Sure. Like ultra professional by this point. You know, they're all really like household names at this point.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about every single character, but I've got a couple more. The antagonist, Charlie's former partner, the gambling rival Carface, the Bulldog. He was voiced by Vic Tayback, and that's like another 60s and 70s hard hitter, and he was in Gunsmoke, Alice, and interestingly, I found he was also in The Partridge Family.
Oh, okay.
But there were dozens of credits for him as well, and I feel like his really gravelly, growly sounding voice was absolutely perfect. Couldn't have been better for the role.
Yeah.
And even as a kid, I was really impressed with that voice actor, knowing that it was all pretend and they are actors.
Right.
I was really, really impressed by his voice specifically.
He really brought it.
Because it's just so perfect.
It's like if you had to pick a voice, that would be the one.
It sounds like a gambling bulldog. Yeah. So another one. I have like tossed around how to present this to you because I think it's going to matter to you. So I'm just going to ask you first. Do you know who voiced King Gator?
No, the voice it was familiar to me.
But you don't know who it was.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, King Gator was voiced by none other than actor-singer Ken Page, the voice of Oogie Boogie.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I feel like a lot of people probably knew that. Personally, though, I didn't make the connection until I was like researching it this week. And I was like, oh, of course it is.
Yeah, I did not hear Oogie Boogie in his voice at all.
To be honest, I only hear it when I'm listening to it and not when I'm watching it.
Interesting.
Like if I isolate it and I'm just hearing it, I can tell that it's his voice. But if I'm watching it, I don't see it.
I bet I'll hear it now if I were to listen to it. But
I'm sure. Yeah, now that you're listening for it.
That's surprising.
Ken Page, Oogie Boogie, and King Gator. And apparently, like, Don went back to the drawing board after he heard Ken's voice and, like, resketched the character because he wanted it to reflect the sound more. Mm-hmm. And I still feel like I prefer Oogie Boogie's songs.
Yeah, of course. You can't beat Danny Elfman.
More than King Gator's, but we'll get to that later again as well.
Yeah.
Of course, anybody that knows anything about this movie, if you know a trivia fact about this movie, it's probably this. It's probably about the voice of Anne-Marie, Judith Barcy. So I saved her for last. Mm-hmm. She was an icon in her own right in the 80s. She was in over 70 commercials, and she was also in Jaws: The Revenge. And she had lots of guest appearances on TV shows and stuff at the time. She was just a very charismatic, very like highly regarded up-and-coming actress. The Anne-Marie character was actually designed based on a combination of her movement and the movement of Snow White. And you may know that she voiced another Don Bluth favorite character, Ducky from The Land Before Time.
Yeah.
And her voice is so sweet and innocent, and it brings tears to my eyes all the time. Always has. It just has this innocent, echo to it.
The times I got emotional watching it was strictly due to her character.
Yes. Anne-Marie... Again, he had no reason to make these movies this sad, and she made me sad before I ever knew of her real life story. And both of these movies were actually released after her death.
Wow.
I'm not going to go into all the details of it because there are like dozens of true crime podcasts and articles and videos that go all about it. So that's not what we're here for, but just in case you're not familiar with it, Judith and her mother were both killed by Judith's father when she was 10 years old after years of domestic abuse. And then he himself committed suicide and set fire to the house. So Anne-Marie was the last role that she ever did. And she passed away before they were even done with animation.
Yeah.
She had finished her recording, but the animation wasn't even finished. So she never saw these movies. I feel like there's a lot of dark serendipity in this that just like take my breath away. I mean, absolutely crushed me.
It's
uncanny and unreal the way that this ended up working out. But the parallels between her life and the struggles of her character in the film are like almost too much for me.
It does add that extra layer. God.
Yeah. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Judith and her legacy. And obviously, it's one of the most tragic stories to come from this time in media history. Like, it was a big story at the time as well. Also, you know, we're in November now, but October was Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So I wanted to mention that. And I'm getting like emotional thinking about it because it's a really, like, it's important to me, near to me for many reasons. I hope if you're listening, you're safe and sound. And if you're not safe and sound, I hope that you'll reach out to someone. And there are safe ways to do that. But I also am going to step up my soapbox for a second, and not that it, you know, is changing anything, but I am personally incredibly frustrated with how slowly law enforcement and social programs tend to move in cases like this. And it's honestly one of the reasons that she ended up dying in the first place, because there were years of abuse and people just didn't mobilize. She was interviewed by child psychologists that said, yes, she's being abused.
Really?
Child Protective Services went and didn't do anything.
God.
So they knew it was happening and they didn't stop it. And that just frustrates me. So
it's too common.
I mean, if you ever need help, it's way, way too common. But if you ever need help, I mean, you can reach out to me and I'll try to find sources that will actually mobilize, because that's one of my greatest frustrations is the slowness with which a lot of different forces will act. Speaking of the powers that be being slow to mobilize, they were actually buried in unmarked graves for 16 years.
Really?
Before a foundation ended up raising money for their headstones. And both of their headstones now have engraved Judith's signature, yep, from Ducky. So that's on both of their headstones.
Wow.
Changing gears just a tad bit, I can't speak to the validity of these claims, but as I was looking into this, I knew the story already, but as I was kind of looking into it for all the facts, I found that the house, that they renovated the house that he burned down, and as recently as 2020, it was on a show called Murder House Flip, where the current owners were claiming that it's haunted.
Yeah.
Apparently the garage door opens and closes by itself a lot, and the daughter of that family was living in Judith's bedroom, like her former bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And she was having a lot of intense nightmares and problems sleeping. So
crazy.
supposedly they've worked to dissipate the negative energy in the home as recently as 2020, but I found that really wild as I was looking it up, so I thought I would share it. I know, but it was part of a TV show, so it felt really disingenuous, and that bothered me a little bit.
Yeah. Hey, guys, nothing on TV is real, not even reality TV.
But I thought it was odd that they would play on that case so many years later and so recently.
Yeah, it feels almost too soon.
All that being said, please rest in peace, Judith and Maria. You're not forgotten. You never will be. You know, your legacy is absolutely cemented into culture,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's, you know, the best that any of us can hope for. So,
yeah,
God. So, if that isn't dark enough for you, now I would like to kind of get into the darkness of the movie.
Still dark, different kind of darkness. It's a different shade of black.
Exactly, a different shade of black. So, much like we've learned with Ferngully, the All Dogs Go to Heaven that we know and love and have nightmares about was apparently tamer than the version that Don originally set out to make.
Oh, right. Wow.
A lot of people on the internet know this too, but from what I read, the original cut of the movie was going to be rated PG by the MPAA.
Mm-hmm.
And after screenings were conducted with the studios, they suggested like a really heavy edit to remove the PG subject matter and downgrade it to a G rating.
Yeah.
And so I can tell you some of the things that they took out.
Yeah.
They took out a frame that showed Charlie actually being hit by the car, the actual impact.
Okay. That would have been really traumatizing.
Not that it was much better, but they did take that out. And they also took out, I found it interesting, they only took out certain moments of the hell nightmare that we'll get to in full detail.
Yeah.
But originally, they had a lot more close-ups of the devil, Satan, dragon figure.
Yeah.
And at one point he said, "Now you're mine," like really scary, creepy, and they took that out.
Okay.
They also apparently edited the weaponry, and this is like, a lot of people on the internet have mixed opinions about this, but instead of the gun, like it looks like a Tommy gun, but they made it a ray gun.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, okay, in the 30s they had a ray gun.
Yeah.
The dogs had a ray gun, but I mean, dogs had a casino, so, you know, whatever. And they didn't take out the gun entirely, they just made it a ray gun, and so they were doing this hopefully to achieve that G rating.
Interesting.
But also probably because of Judith's death. They removed the actual gunshots.
Oh, so she was shot?
He shot her and her mom.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So when the film was released, it did have a G rating, which is laughable to me. Like, absolutely laughable. It is PG at the minimum. Yeah. For sure.
Does the G rating even exist these days?
I don't know, honestly.
I feel like PG is just the lowest it gets.
PG is really,
I mean, this could be a PG-13 movie.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I think PG-13 would have been way more appropriate.
If you think about how young 13-year-olds are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how a lot of movies that are PG-13 should be
I think solid PG-13. Solid.
Yeah.
And we'll get into a little bit more about like ratings in a minute because I've got some other stuff to talk about in regards to what was actually allowed to be in the movie. But yeah, I feel like even with the things that they cut out, it's still disturbing as like it is so disturbing. And knowing what they took out, I don't know if it really made that much of a difference in terms of the overall impact that it had on the psyche of children.
Right.
So Don actually kept the director's cut with all this stuff still included, and I think he did hope to eventually release it, but in the mid-90s, he went to look for it, and apparently it was stolen or misplaced. With a lot of things with this film, the Technicolor print, everything, it just kind of disappeared, lost to time.
Interesting.
But you can find some of the moments online, because apparently there is a Tumblr user who was taking an animation class in 2016, and her professor played the uncut scene, the Hell Nightmare, in their animation class. We don't have her name, but apparently they worked for Don Bluth. I think it was a woman, but I can't be sure. So they apparently were one of very few people to have a copy of that. And this girl recorded it. And so you can find some of them online.
Wow.
Yeah. And apparently all of the original artwork was also destroyed by presumably Goldcrest Films because they didn't want to pay to have it stored correctly.
Oh my God.
That's one of the more horrific things I'm going to tell you today, actually.
That's awful.
Yeah,
God.
like Goldcrest they were so cheap about everything they did. And so a lot of the original drawings, if not all of them, are also gone. Terrible.
That's how you burn a bridge.
Right?
Man.
Yeah, it's just a lot. And honestly, so going beyond just the cut and what ended up in the film, I had a hard time knowing where to start in terms of the darkness because it would have been easier to talk about what wasn't dark in this film.
Right.
Everything was so deeply, I don't even have the words to describe the level that this sinks to in terms of content. Like, it's just everything everywhere is dark all the time.
It's definitely a very gritty movie.
Yeah. So I'm just going to jump around and talk about some of the themes that we see.
Perfect.
The first category that I have listed is booze and revelry.
Category 1. We need like a bell or something. Like
Category 1.
Sound effect.
So the film opens with this pretty involved jailbreak that's happening. And we learn that Charlie and Itchy are jailbreaking themselves from death row of the Pound, which seems to be functioning like more like a jail. And we do learn later that Carface had Charlie framed for a crime. Mm-hmm. So that's why he's on death row.
Right.
So this jailbreak is happening.
Yeah, Itchy's there just to break him out. Itchy wasn't on death row.
Oh, right. That's true. You're right. Yeah. Itchy's there to break him out. Because see, Itchy's resourceful. Itchy knows what he's doing. Itchy's got it all together. Although there's some funny exchanges in the beginning because they make jokes about red wires and green wires and whether like dogs are colorblind and you know.
Yeah. I wonder if that was improv.
Honestly, I think it may have been, and I think that's so great. Once they do manage to get out, they almost drown because Itchy hits like a water main. Mm-hmm. And so then they're almost shot by these mysterious ray guns as they're getting away. So they still barely escape with their life. And they escape to a casino where a literal rat race is taking place. Mm-hmm. People are taking bets on the rat race.
So many puns.
Oh, just puns galore. And not only that, but smokes, booze, and gambling galore.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's not implied. It's not glossed over.
There are people dogs passed out drunk. Like, they're just like falling over sloppy.
Dogs passing out drunk. Everybody's drinking. Pitchers of beer being slung.
But it's okay because it's the 30s.
Because it's the 30s and it's the 80s still. So it's okay. And they glorify all this behavior in addition to stealing, pickpocketing. All the song is just about Charlie's lifestyle at the time. Yeah. And one of the lyrics to You Can't Keep a Good Dog Down actually says, I tried a life of virtue. I prefer a life of sin.
There you go.
And this is getting that sin concept in there as well really early. And this made perfect sense to me as a child because I was taught that all of those things were sinful. Not only that, things that I wasn't taught as much about but are present in the film. All kinds of racist imagery in the song.
Really?
All kinds of sexist caricatures in the song.
Yeah, I heard some of that.
Yeah, you'll have to go back and like check it out, but they talk about people of different nationalities, and it's a lot of really stereotypical racist bullshit.
There was a lot to that.
Just all over the place in the first 10 minutes.
Well, they're talking about all the different breeds that are in him. So they're trying to basically say that he's just a mutt.
Right.
Like, he's got all these different dog breeds. He's not purebred.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Not, playing off the not pure, right? Mm-hmm. But I think they're probably also just using that as a, he's clearly like a German Shepherd. So I think it's like, it's this weird, ironic, I'm not pure, I'm all these other kinds of breeds. Yeah. So like, I'm all these other kinds of nationalities.
And honestly, that's
strange.
Not so terrible, but it's the way they present it. It's the caricatures that they do that make it racist. Yeah. Yeah, it's rough.
There's a lot to that.
Yeah. We also reveal Carface as the antagonist, and obviously his name's a play on the movie Scarface from 1983, which was like loosely based on Al Capone. So it's mobster immediately from the get-go. You know his name and you know what his role is. You may not as a 5-year-old like I was, but you do if you're, an adult watching this. Yeah. And I guess since like everybody that was animating this was, they were watching all the types of movies that Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise were in. So things like Blazing Saddles and just like blatantly racist, violent films. That's what they grew up against. Like that was their backdrop. And so now they're animating this. So it definitely trickles down into that. For sure. They watched decades of these mob movies and Western brawls. And so it felt natural to them. And that's how you get a corrupt casino owner bulldog that's huffing and puffing on a giant, disgusting cigar.
For the entire movie.
For the whole movie. And I mean, we're less than 10 minutes in at this point, and we've already seen all this stuff. Yeah. Which is just, it's so eye-opening to watch it as an adult. I also laughed when Carface has a moment where he says he's surrounded by morons. And I was like, oh, is this like precursor to Scar? Like, I'm surrounded by idiots? Yeah. But I actually looked it up on TV Tropes, and there are dozens of iterations of this line going back to the 70s.
Just a common thing.
So it's a common thing. It's not like a quoted thing. We're not quoting each other, but the idea of an antagonist, a villain that is surrounded by like henchmen that are bumbling and dumb. So speaking of Oliver and Company and going back to the animation style a little bit, I was looking everywhere. Like I was digging everywhere that I could to like prove it to myself because I've known it since I watched it as a kid. I think it's easy for anybody with like a keen eye to notice the design of like 2 dogs that are in the casino walking around and to realize that they are very similar, if not exactly the same as the designs from Oliver and Company.
Mm-hmm.
And those are Tito, the Chihuahua.
Yeah.
Dead Ringer. Like the design is exactly the same as Tito. And then there's also Einstein, the Great Dane in Oliver and Company. And you can see a Great Dane that is identical in that scene. So I thought that was fun. And like I said, I was looking everywhere trying to like prove that. And I couldn't really find that, but there were a lot of comparisons between All Dogs and Oliver and Company.
Yeah.
And the only article that I found actually related to Rita, the dog from Oliver and Company, the Irish setter, and Sasha from All Dogs Go to Heaven 2. And they talked about how Rita was definitely the prototype of Sasha. So there was a lot of overlap. I don't know if the exact same animators drew them or if they had the drawings or whatever, but I'd be shocked if not, because they are so similar. Diving back into the darkness again, the hits keep coming, literally, because Carface gets Charlie drunk off his ass, just absolutely smashed.
So smashed.
Pun intended.
I laughed so hard when he was like, do you want to sing with me? he's like so sloppy drunk, and he's talking to the guys, and he's like, hey, you
can't keep a good dog
down. Do you want to sing with me? I have this good one. It's all about being a good dog, and like,
oh yeah, it is really funny.
It's clever,
and I think it was improv. A lot of it, like that was just.
It's got to be.
That was another great example of the animator and the actor working together to really make the character feel real, because they did a great job drunk acting.
Oh yeah, but yeah, they got him smashed.
Yeah, they got him smashed, and then they smashed him because Killer blindfolds him, and Charlie's guzzling down all this beer and getting the hiccups and muttering, mumbling, and singing, like you said. And it never registered for me as a kid, like how adult that actually was.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it made sense. I understood what was happening, but it never clicked.
We were also used to seeing cartoon animals drunk because of like Looney Tunes and
you are
smoking.
Entirely correct. And I'm about to give you quite a lot of information about that because I found it interesting.
It is.
So obviously there are a lot of kids' movies where the lead characters get drunk, like you said. References, the one that sticks out to me in my mind was like Beauty and the Beast. There were a lot of references to alcohol in Beauty and the Beast. So these were things that I knew and was thinking about. So I started to look into like, was that allowed, or like when did that stop being allowed? Because I was like, do characters get drunk today? Like I don't feel like they do in kids' movies. Not to the extent, especially that they did when we were kids.
For sure not.
So it may not be a common thing to animate now, but I found a 1999 peer-reviewed study from the Journal of the American Medical Association. And at that time in 1999, they reviewed all G-rated animated feature films released between 1937 and 1997 by all 5 like major production companies. So that's Disney, MGM, Warner Brothers, Universal, and Fox. And they reviewed them for instances of tobacco and alcohol use.
Yeah.
It said of the 50 films that they reviewed, 68% displayed at least one episode of tobacco or alcohol use.
Wow.
56% portrayed one or more instances of tobacco use. So 50% included alcohol. Smoking was portrayed on screen by 76 characters for more than 45 minutes in duration altogether. Wow. And alcohol use was portrayed by 63 characters for 27 total minutes of duration. They found that good, quote unquote, good characters use tobacco and alcohol as frequently as bad characters do. And they said that cigars and wine were like the most frequently used substances in these movies. Would you like to know or guess the top 5 worst offenders of using on-screen alcohol?
Is this movies or TV shows?
Movies. Animated films.
You put me on the
released
spot.
In that time period. I mean, just take a shot.
I'll try to guess one of them.
Yeah. I'll tell you this. 2 of them I guessed, but they were number 4 and number 5. I didn't guess any of the top 3.
Not Oliver and Company.
No.
Who? What?
So all of them are Disney movies.
They're all Disney movies.
Mm-hmm.
Beauty and the Beast?
Yes. Beauty and the Beast is number 5.
Wow. Wild.
You want to know the rest?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I'll count you down. Number 4 was The Great Mouse Detective.
Okay.
Which that was the other one that I guessed because I remember that just being everybody sloshing beer the whole time. Fantasia was number 3.
Wow.
Dumbo was number 2.
Oh, yes. I should have guessed Dumbo.
And Sleeping Beauty was number 1. These were the 5 movies with the most on-screen use of alcohol.
You could almost say, I don't know about Pinocchio, but with Pleasure Island.
Yeah, I think Pinocchio probably is in there too.
But not in the
top 5. So they did it by number of seconds
that
it was visible. So That's the countdown. Isn't that wild?
I don't remember anything like that in Sleeping
Me neither.
Beauty.
But that was number one as part of this study. I didn't fact check it, so if you're listening and I'm wrong, correct me. But yeah, isn't that crazy?
That's wild.
Obviously, there are also like a lot of similarities to Oliver and Company because Carface is like initiating Charlie's death, and it's like the train tracks and fake. You know, it's it all in my mind blended together. For a long time, I feel like I equated the two movies. Obviously, I knew that they were different, but I just had a lot of their scenes kind of mixed around in my head. But Charlie is this drunken sitting duck in the path of the car, and the car hits him and he dies. The actual like dying scene always made sense to me for some reason. It's just like this tunnel of swirling color and light, and I was like, okay, that's probably what it looks like when you die.
Sure.
And then I liked the depiction of heaven. It was very pretty, if not still very desaturated.
Yeah.
But again, I think that's another case where the color, if it had been as vivid as they intended, it may not have played in as well to the dialogue where Charlie's talking about how boring it all actually seems in heaven.
Yeah.
So now we get to heaven. A fun fact, this is from like the IMDb trivia, and I had noticed one of the names before, but not both of them. So when the Whippet is like looking in Charlie's record, like trying to find some goodness so that she can admit him to heaven, his mother and father are listed in the book, and they're named Lonnie A and Bert R. And so they also look like canine versions of Lonnie Anderson and Burt Reynolds, and they were married at the time.
Nice.
So that was their little like nod. And Lonnie does actually cameo in the movie. That's who voices Flo, the dog that's taking care of all the puppies.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a fun little fact. But now, here we go. Buckle up. My next little subheading is religious trauma around heaven. Mm-hmm. So, of course, like the song, Let Me Be Surprised, and the explanation of all the clocks. So everybody has a clock and it's ticking down.
Right.
And then when your time's up, your time's up. And so all of that was like, it delighted me as a kid. It was very calm and soothing. And it's probably the last soothing thing that we see in this whole movie.
Right.
And again, my worldview has shifted like a lot since I was a kid. And so I can kind of understand Charlie's perspective now of like, but wait, like, let me be surprised. Like, there's no surprise. There's no excitement. That's all gone. That's not part of heaven.
Right.
And even as a kid, I was kind of surprised by that, but I didn't mind as much because I was so desperate to have that peace.
Right.
And I still understand that impulse. But, you know, it didn't matter as much to me at the time. I was like, well, yeah, that's what you want.
Yeah, because we're told that if you're lucky, that's what you'll get.
Exactly. That's the ultimate reward. And speaking of that, I remember that my blood always absolutely just ran stone cold, and it still does to this day. When Charlie steals back his clock, he like winds it up again and kind of plummets back to earth. And you can hear the Whippet crying, "You can never come back.
I know, God.
You can never come back." It haunts me to this day. It has haunted me in my dreams.
I know.
It is the most terrifying thing that you could ever tell, like, child me. Absolutely just wrecked me. Like I have been telling you roundabout for the last little while, I came from this very, very literal, legalistic, religious background growing up. And in the group that I was raised in, salvation is always hanging in the balance. There's no point at which you're absolutely going to be saved. So you're constantly trying to repent and better yourself.
Yeah.
Salvation is always a loose term. You know, you're constantly reevaluating it. And it's always hanging on like your most recent bad deed and whether or not you've repented for that deed yet.
I know this feeling so well. It's so terrible.
Yeah.
Years of just dread and stress and guilt.
Dread is the word. Guilt, just constant, because you're like, I used to think, you know, you say your prayers at night before you go to bed. I would often pray before I got into the car, just in case there was a car accident. Yeah. You know, like I was very, very concerned that if at every moment I wasn't as pure as I could possibly be, then I was done for. Yeah. And again, if you're growing up in that world and heaven isn't an option,
it's
like,
a scary thought.
The feeling, the alternative is just so hollow and empty and haunting, and it like eats away at your insides. Yeah. And I'm not exaggerating any of these points. If you did not grow up the way that I did, and you're just like, oh, it can't be, you know, that bad. You're a kid. Like, how much can you really know about all this stuff? No, I knew about death from a time I can't remember a time where I didn't understand death. And all of this was weighed in all the time. Yep. I was very familiar with all these feelings by the time I was 4, 5, 6, 7, when I was incessantly watching this movie. And so you add into this movie, now that he's left heaven and he's told that he can't come back, you add in this literal ticking clock with his soul is on the line. So it just feeds right into that constant dread that you have already in life.
Yes.
But in this movie, there's this visual representation and there's this acute awareness, even as a kid, that the other shoe is going to drop. The watch will stop ticking.
Yeah, that was my first thought was that, oh, he only wound it like 3 times. Keep winding it. Oh my God.
Right?
You're going to die in like a day.
Yeah. And when you do, you're not going to heaven.
Yeah, you can never come back.
So, oh man.
Yeah, the whole concept is like playing off that religious belief that if you fall from grace, it's this. Whereas I guess we were told that if you repented, you could come back, but you had to stay in a state of constant repentance,
right?
Constantly being sorry, feeling guilty.
Yes.
But so yeah. The angel tells him, "Oh, because you chose to leave heaven, you had a guarantee.
You had your chance
because you're a dog.
Yes.
But now that you've chosen to leave,
you can't come back here.
Yeah, you can't come back. What's the word I'm thinking of?
I mean,
I grew up believing the one unforgivable sin to deny the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
But there's a word I'm thinking of.
I know what you're thinking of too.
Exactly.
And I mean, there's a lot of discussion in those circles about what that sin actually is. And is it that you deny?
You saw it. You didn't like what you saw, so you left. It's like, oh, you can't ever come back.
To me, that also, and I mean, he didn't technically know that, I guess, when he left. Maybe she did say it at one point, like, you're here, and if you leave, that's it.
No, he didn't know that. He just knew he didn't
Once he made the choice, he found out. He didn't know it before. And to me, that's worse because I also grew up with a lot of like regret pushed on me often, and I took every bit of it, the shame and regret, and the idea that it's a choice that I made that's keeping me out of heaven. I made a choice to leave and now I can't go back. Like the fact that I did it to myself makes it 1,000 times worse than anything else.
Yes.
And that's exactly what you're told, in religion. So or in the specific group where we grew up. I can't keep generalizing. I hope I don't offend anybody here. It's just kind of
it's pretty common.
Nature of the beast when you grew up the way that you did or the way that we did.
It's not just where we grew up. It's all over the world.
Yeah. And it is, there are different versions, but for sure.
This just happens to be like a somewhat Judeo-Christian film about something that pretty much every religion deals with.
I mean, like we said, he was LDS.
Yeah.
So his beliefs are apparent, if not explicit. And this scene genuinely triggers that, like, I have a lot of anxiety, if you can imagine. And a lot of times if I have like an anxiety attack or a panic attack, there's this doom feeling. And I've described it to Christian before. It's very, very deep, dark. It's a hopelessness, the doom. It's really the worst thing about my anxiety, and it triggers like depression for me. And this scene has triggered that feeling for me for my entire life.
Yeah.
I still have a really hard time stomaching it. And I personally think that this movie should have like a warning label in big red letters for people with religious trauma, just because it is so visceral for me.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've heard other people that grew up similarly talk about it similarly. I'm sure nobody has my exact connection here, but still, very intense. Oh, buddy. So continuing into our dark cave of this movie, speaking of trauma, we also get a taste of puppy trauma when Charlie, who is now living again, reveals himself to Itchy. And Itchy can't stop screaming, and a lot of this was ad-libbed apparently, but he can't stop screaming. He's throwing things at Charlie. This is a ghost for all he knows. Yeah. And so he's freaking out, and it's justified. And of course, it's meant to be humorous in the movie, but he's having a panic attack.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. And then Itchy describes seeing his best friend die and his body flying through the air.
Yes.
He says those words. But tell me again, this is a kid's movie. This is just an innocent little kid's movie. Itchy has just gone through the trauma of seeing his best friend's body.
Yeah, he saw his best friend die. He saw his lifeless body fly through the air, and he said something about it floating in the water.
Yeah,
or something like that. He saw your body in the water or something.
I saw you, but I knew you were gone or something.
I was like, oh, that's pretty dark.
That's pretty dark, guys. It's so dark. Yeah, so I'll go back. I'll have some more religious trauma stuff to bring up.
Nice.
But shifting gears again a little bit, and we're going to talk about the emotional trauma surrounding Anne-Marie and her treatment in the movie.
Yeah, this broke my heart.
We can't get into the trauma of this movie without talking about this, and I think this is more universal than even, some of the more specific stuff, religious stuff.
I was actually kind of horrified because I don't remember a lot of this movie. I remember watching it. I remember the visuals of what the dogs look like and the different characters. But when I was like, whoa, she's been kidnapped and like abused.
Held against her will in a dungeon.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So obviously you cannot talk about the trauma from this movie without talking about the torrent of emotional and physical abuse, manipulation, gaslighting that was unleashed on our dear, sweet, poor Anne-Marie.
So tragic.
And it doesn't only come from Carface. This is the thing that gets to me watching it now. It's not just Carface. It's coming from Charlie. And that's almost more traumatizing. You expect Carface to be a villain and behave like a villain.
Yeah.
But it's also coming from the hero of the movie.
That's the part that bothered me.
The protagonist. Yeah. If in case it's blurry for you, haven't watched in a while, you miss it. The reason that they want Anne-Marie specifically is because she can talk to animals.
Right.
So they're able to use this gift that she has to make money.
Because they're betting. They're betting on races.
They're betting on races
and fights and stuff.
And kangaroo fights in New Orleans in the 1930s. I don't know what that was about.
Who knows what animals were in New Orleans in 1930?
Oh.
Well, yeah. So they're making money because they're placing bets, and she can talk to animals and find out who's going to win.
That's why Anne-Marie is this prized possession for Carface. That's why Charlie takes her away from Carface. Not even just to save her, because I think Charlie does on some level recognize that it's wrong to have her caged up the way that Carface does.
Well, he immediately gets those like dollar signs in his eyes,
Right. Yes. He's still not doing it altruistically. He's doing it for his own, benefit. And that's the theme that you follow through this movie. So when you look back at this movie, it is literally just the majority of the story is about greedy booze hounds.
Yeah.
I have in my notes, haha. Like lying to, manipulating, using, and abusing an orphan girl.
She's like
over and over.
She's like 4 years old, right?
I think she's meant to be like 5 or 6.
So young.
Just with reckless abandon the whole movie, which is absolutely insane to look back at. It came out in 1989. That wasn't that long ago, but I guess it was in terms of like knowledge about psychology and trauma.
Yes.
And I mean, you may right now be thinking, like, okay, guys, it was a kid's movie. Like, it wasn't meant to be that deep. And
there's so much depth to this. This is why we're talking about it.
Some things that I told myself to justify as I was getting older, I probably rewatched it in high school. And I was like, well, they had to make it, the lies and like the deceit, they had to make it really obvious and feel really obvious for like a young audience. So that's why it feels like they're laying it on so thick in some places. And it was intended, it seems, and knowing that the background of Don Bluth, it seems to have been intended as like another one of the Aesop kind of cautionary tale sorts of things against the greed and the lying.
Educational.
Yeah, it had a moral. But I came into it as this like very soft-hearted, empathetic, codependent child. And so hearing all of those warnings, I knew I wasn't greedy. I knew I wasn't going to lie, but I came into this very codependent, and the way that Charlie behaved and the gaslighting that came from Charlie offended me as a child, and I couldn't put my finger on why. Obviously, he was being deceptive, but there was more to it than that. He was leveraging her emotions and their connection and relationship against her.
Everything she asked for, he was like, yeah, I'll do that for you. Sure. Just do what I want first.
Right. And listen to me and do what I say, and everything will be fine. And I was on the receiving end of gaslighting like that. So I couldn't put my finger on like what was it that so bothered me about Charlie treating her that way. And now being a little bit more trauma informed and like emotionally intelligent, because I always thought I was emotionally intelligent, but I had no grasp on that until I was in my mid-20s.
Right.
I didn't really know what that meant until I like started therapy and tried to become more healthy approaching relationships, and it just didn't all click for me until I was much older and recognized the codependency, recognized all of these things as for what they were.
Right.
And the negative effect that they can have. So it really offended me rewatching it, just how far they take that. And also, knowing Judith's story and her story of abuse and what she did endure as a person in life, putting those two things together. Like, some of her scenes are almost impossible for me to watch because of all the intersection of all that.
It's a lot.
It's just like, so narcissistic abuse, he's using guilt as his manipulation tool, which is what I have experienced a lot in my life.
Yeah.
and gaslighting in general, just basically telling her that it isn't how she sees it and she needs to accept his reality. And it's just rampant. And okay, if the intent was to make it feel so wrong that even a kid can like pick up on it, bingo. But unfortunately, that's not an exaggeration for a lot of people enduring emotional abuse.
Pretty standard example of just abuse.
Yeah.
It's not far-fetched. You don't look at it and go, well, that's over the top. It's like pretty par for the course. It's pretty spot on.
Yep. It feels very spot on. And I think that's part of why it really gets to me. Because it's easily conversations that you can insert your own experiences into and recognize the manipulation that's occurring.
Yeah.
And so my bone to pick with it is the fact that the consequences, I'm doing air quotes, consequences of greed and lying, obviously for dogs, all dogs go to heaven, technically. But the consequences of greed and lying are still kind of displayed in this movie. But the nuance of it when it comes to like specific types of manipulation and deceit, like the way that Charlie is always a martyr, saying, oh, I wish you would really do this for me.
Yeah.
And the way that he just, puts himself down to solicit the emotions of someone else.
Well, I just came to say goodbye.
Yes.
I don't really have anybody else, but I'll get by. I'll get by.
That's exactly
cough,
the
cough.
scene that I have noted here. Yes. That scene when she's found this family, she's enjoying her delicious waffles with butter and syrup.
Oh, she broke my heart.
It wrecked me when Charlie's at the window saying, and all he wants her for, at this point, the connection isn't really, they're not selling the connection of the two of them as friends at all.
No.
It's still very self-serving on Charlie's part. And that just destroyed me when he tried to use that against her to have her leave this safety.
One of the first things she says when you get to know her as a character, outside of that like dungeon where she's kept, one of the first things that she contributes for like her own personality and her own needs is, can you help me find a mommy and a daddy? You're like, oh, she's an orphan. She needs a family. Got it. This is, wow, she's with dogs right now.
Yeah.
She needs parents. And then she finally finds it. She gets it. And he's trying to take it away from her.
That's why the martyrdom and everything is so much harder for me to stomach. It just makes me so sick. And then, so you move past that. If you can hang with it, you move past that. The other thing that I have noted here that was so devastating is when Charlie admits to Itchy that he was just using Anne-Marie.
Yep.
And, he's going off the rails a little bit. He may or may not mean exactly what he's saying, but he's trying to win Itchy back because Itchy's like, boss, this feels...
He's partially trying to get his friend back because he's like basically saying we need to go our separate ways now. And he's like, nah, man, I don't care about her.
Right. It's always been me and you kind of thing.
Yeah.
But Anne-Marie overhears this.
You're not my friend. You're a bad dog.
Squeaker.
And I'm sorry, but Don Bluth, you did not have to animate her the way you did in that scene. Her face distorts in this
so tragic.
realization of the way that she's being treated, and it's just, it's almost unwatchable to me.
It's bad. Yeah, it's rough. It's rough.
It's just so painful, so painful. But so all that being said, I just don't think that they really address the effect that these types of behaviors and this type of emotional abuse can have on other people.
Right.
And it wasn't really the fault of the filmmakers. It was a product of the time. Those weren't conversations people were having, but they should have been. I'm here to tell you. And I'm really glad that people do nowadays.
Yeah.
But yeah, really rough. And speaking of, God, I hate that I have to keep doing this. Speaking of like abuse, so I don't even want to say it. I'm having trouble even making myself. So Judith was originally going to also do Anne-Marie's singing parts. So Anne-Marie has a song that's essentially Annie. Betcha they're rich.
Yeah.
Like Annie's little song in the orphanage. It's pretty much exactly that. She sings about wanting a family, and I'm speaking about these things out of order, so forgive me, but I'm looking at it through a trauma lens.
We're jumping around.
We're jumping around a little bit, but Judith was originally going to sing those parts, and she actually broke down during like a reading or an audition of those parts, and it was due to the abuse that she was undergoing. So that's one of the points at which they started trying to get her evaluated. And so instead of like trying not to overwhelm her and pressure her, they gave those parts to a girl named Lana Beeson.
Wow. I noticed that the singing seemed a little bit different, the voice, but still close enough to not matter.
You have to also think about, this is coming from, the early days of like the stage mom and everything, not to blame her mother at all, because they had a lot of success and they enjoyed doing it together. Judith did enjoy doing what she was doing, for what I can tell. But it's still, the way that we push children in entertainment is really intense.
Yeah.
And so this breakdown and the way that they handled it, that's coming at it from 32 years ago.
Right.
So you know that it was bad if they were addressing it, because it just didn't get addressed for the most part. Even in the early 2000s, didn't really get addressed.
Right. Right.
So they had to modify.
Yeah, there are a lot of conversations now about whether or not there should be child performers. There should be like an age limit.
And there are a lot of child performers. You can go on YouTube, and there are just so many people that talk about their experiences growing up in Hollywood, and it's rough.
It's rough.
We need to treat everybody better. Just period statement. That could be the end of this podcast. We just need to treat people better.
Let's just be
individually,
better to everyone.
Systematically. It all needs to be better.
Yes.
But yeah, so there's also a point like in Charlie's car where Anne Marie starts like saying her prayers, and Charlie's just constantly like, shut up, go to bed, go to bed, go to bed. He just like wants her to go to bed, and then she's like squeaking around on the seat, which is cute.
Calls her Squeaker.
He does. He calls her Squeaker. And she starts praying, and she's thanking God for Charlie.
For rescuing her.
Thank you, Charlie, for rescuing me. Yeah. Which is like Stockholm Syndrome type feelings that I have now. But she thanks God for Charlie, and she's praying for mom and daddy. Some people don't feel that they pushed a religious narrative in this movie. And while I would agree that there's not like a lot of theology or like a denominational slant to it, there's not like a denominational push for the LDS group or any other, you can't tell me that this juxtaposition of heaven and hell and the implication that all dogs go to heaven, the end of that sentence is, but not all people do. Like, that's the only place you can go with that.
Right.
People are like, oh, it's not really a religious movie. And I'm like, it is one of the most religious
Heaven's in the title.
It has heaven and hell. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, to their credit, they don't push a lot of denominational stuff, and that's fine. But I still wouldn't be surprised, and I'm totally putting words in his mouth here. So I apologize if you ever hear this, Don. But I would not be surprised if he viewed this film as almost a mission, knowing just a bare minimum. I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. I'm not an expert on therapy. I'm not an expert on religion.
Nope.
But I have my experiences and understanding. And I would be surprised if he didn't sometimes at least consider this children's movie. You know, he's speaking to impressionable young children. I'd be shocked if he didn't consider it some sort of mission or opportunity to evangelize.
Well, there's that angle of like, let's show how bad all these characters are and show children basically how to not get into positions like this. Like, if someone's treating you like this, they're not good. Get away, get out.
True.
Maybe you could look at it from that perspective, going, we're going to make this for kids, and it's going to be educational because we're going to show them the way not to live your life.
And I mean, that may be true. And that may be helpful in some people's minds. I'm not saying that, because I mean, as much as I keep saying this movie triggered the shit out of me, I loved this movie. I watched it constantly. And although I may have trouble watching it now, like, we'll get into more discussion like that, but it's just, it doesn't mean that I didn't like the movie. It's just that it was heavy-handed is all I'm trying to say.
Well, it evolved in your mind over time. Like these things do.
It did. It evolved in my mind over time, and it feels very, very heavy for me, whereas I understand it may not for everybody. Mm-hmm. So, you still with me? You hanging in there? How you feeling? Get a drink of water. Take a breath.
Get some whiskey.
Maybe that's a better option at this point. Because now we've moved beyond a little bit of the religious trauma. It will come back. Don't worry. But now I feel like we have to address some of like the violence and the peril in the movie and illness and the way that's depicted. Yeah. So we know that Carface and his gang, they're mobsters. Like, it's not a secret. It's not glossed over. Like, I equate it a lot with Oliver and Company, because we always understood as children, and going back to how kids just kind of pick up on stuff because we were presented with these adult concepts so early. You know, you understand that if you owe somebody a debt and you don't pay them back, that's probably going to be bad for you. Mm-hmm. You understand that Carface has the power in his henchmen, these people that are doing what he says, because he's threatening violence, and he kills Charlie. So it's not a secret. There's also like a pretty iconic moment where Carface is lowering Killer, like his sidekick dog. God, ironic, Killer. He's like he's not a nice guy by any means, but he's a lot more timid than Carface. he's no longer useful to Carface. And so Carface is lowering him to a pool of piranhas.
Yeah.
They show like a piece of meat get just totally obliterated by these piranhas.
Yeah.
And then you have a dog character that you've gotten to know that's also descending toward the same fate. That's pretty dark.
Yeah, it is. I remember like I sat there while watching it. I don't know if I paused it. I may have paused it because I was sitting there thinking like I've dreamt that before. Like I've been dunked in a pool with piranhas that began because he gets his head dunked in at what point
he does.
And before that had happened, I was sitting there thinking, I have a memory of this happening to me, like in a dream or something.
Oh,
and it may have been from this movie.
I think a lot of things that I dreamed were from this movie.
It's weird, but yeah, he does get dunked
he gets
for a second.
Briefly dunked, and he saves himself by telling Carface that he has a ray gun.
A ray gun.
But that's the only reason Carface lets him live, is because he has a weapon that will be useful to Carface.
Yep.
And as if like all the rest of this peril and actual death aren't enough, Charlie and Anne-Marie are eventually kidnapped by bayou rats. And we live near New Orleans.
Yeah. So
the reality of those creatures and how like nauseating and disease-ridden they are is as familiar to us as Mardi Gras is, which is also depicted in the movie.
Both as vile and disease-ridden.
That's not a concept to us. Like we've seen these like nutria, like the rats that are in existence near the rivers and everything.
River rats.
So there's that. River rats, they're kidnapped by these rats. And they are almost eaten by this singing Oogie Boogie alligator.
Yep.
And in that scene, you start talking about sexual themes in kids' movies. This alligator is super suggestive. And he's singing and dancing. And, like, they're dancing on the bones of previous victims of this alligator. This alligator, like, has eaten people.
Right.
And he also seems to want to make more than music with Charlie.
Yeah.
He's like coming on to him. They are coming on to Charlie rather strong.
We'll make music together, you and me.
Let's make music together. And it's just very suggestive, and it kind of comes out of left field. Apparently, on the internet, like, and this is kind of weird because it has like a homophobic, perhaps racist slur involved. But on the internet, it's called like a big-lipped alligator moment, apparently, or a big gay alligator moment.
Okay.
And that has apparently come to mean a scene in a movie that comes out of absolutely nowhere and then is basically not talked about again.
Oh, from this movie?
I think there could be, yes, it's from this movie.
Okay.
I think that there are many better terms and better names that you could call it.
Wow.
But I do agree that it comes out of absolute left field.
Yeah.
And although the alligator does become part of the plot, I think it just didn't lay in. It didn't jive the way that they probably had hoped that it would.
Yeah, I can see like in my mind what the intention was for it to be almost a humorous moment. This big scary alligator is going to eat you, and then a switch is flipped because Charlie, hits a note. He's howling.
Oh yeah.
That's what saves him, because he's like, you have a beautiful singing voice, basically.
Right.
Wow.
And not to mention, Burt Reynolds can't sing, so that was also kind of funny.
Right. So it's like, So I could see where the humor lives. It just wasn't really executed very well.
It just wasn't executed super, super well.
Very random.
And part of it, to me, looking back on it, why it didn't ever really play super great for me, because I was all about a song,
Yeah.
But we noticed that Anne-Marie is like getting sick in the background, and she's like about to drown in the dirty bayou sewer water.
Yeah.
And when she says, Charlie, I don't feel good, I get sick now, like to my stomach. Because he takes her, he's like, oh, squeaker. Like, he takes her seriously, and then that she's really means it, that he really means it.
When he notices it and he pays attention to it, you're like, oh, she must be really sick.
Yeah. I get the same doom feeling when she says that as I do at the, you can never come back. Like, it does the same thing in my stomach. And it also this is a realization that I had this week, but I think it probably also, if not originated, definitely emphasized or helped along my health anxiety.
Yeah.
Because I had pretty severe health anxiety growing up and still have remnants of that today. And I think it comes from movies, and this movie in part, and movies like this, because you see illness depicted so it just feels really hopeless.
Yeah.
And the sadness around it. It happens again in Once Upon a Forest, I mentioned. Balto,
wow.
Where they're making coffins for children.
Yeah.
Because they're all ill with, I guess I don't want to speak out smallpox, yellow fever. But the whole point of Balto is that he's getting vaccines to save the children.
Yeah.
So the way the illness was depicted, I couldn't not mention because I think it played into a lot of my fears as a kid and as an adult.
Right.
In continuing with the violence, Itchy is mugged by Carface and his minions, and we see bruises and scrapes and cuts on Itchy. He's limping when he comes to tell Charlie that he's mugged.
Yeah, he pretty much limps for the rest of the movie too, even at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's limping the whole time because he's hurt.
Yeah.
And the casino that Charlie and Itchy have built with their fortune from the gambling with Anne-Marie, we see it burned to the ground.
Yeah.
Just totally in a ball of flames burned to the ground.
They didn't hold back.
And so at this point, I'm like, have they not done enough? Like, is there not enough to be afraid of? Like, the world is cruel. We get it.
Right.
We fully get it. But they just add these, they keep adding to it. Like, not only is she an orphan, not only is she being raised by dogs, not only are they treating her poorly, but she's also going to have pneumonia. Like, I didn't need all of it.
I saw, because I didn't remember how the movie ended. So in my mind, seeing these patterns and everything getting like every scene in the movie got like worse and worse and worse and worse. Yeah. In my mind, I had this alternative ending. I was like, she's getting sick. Oh my God, is she gonna die? Mm-hmm. And she goes to heaven, and that's why he wants to go to heaven to be with her? Buddy. I was like, this is how the movie was going to end. He had to redeem himself to go be with her in heaven because ultimately he's the reason she died. But that didn't happen.
That didn't happen, but I mean, I get the theory. Like, it makes sense. And then once you're spiraling, like once you're on this downhill like slide, at a certain point, like you expect everything. Like it is that terrible.
I was like, this is the worst thing that could happen.
They could kill a 6-year-old girl. That could happen.
She could have gotten sick and died. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So in line with that, I'm jumping back a little bit in the timeline of the movie because I wanted to break up the religious trauma for you guys, but we're going to go back to the hell nightmare because you may have been waiting for this because most people that know this movie, whether you grew up in religious circles or not, you remember the scenes that depict hell. Yeah. I personally remember 100% of this, minus the scenes that they did take out. Obviously, those were never seen on video on the releases that they did. But I 100% saw this scene play out. I have no doubt in my mind that this was presented to me as a kid. But apparently there's a little bit of a Mandela effect on the internet because some people think that they've seen cuts of this movie that don't have the hell nightmare in it.
Really?
Me being me, I wonder if maybe some parents didn't skip it.
Yeah.
They're just people that believe that it didn't exist. If there ever were cuts of this, like TV cuts or something that did away with the hell nightmare, I say it was for good reason. I didn't realize, just starting at the beginning of the hell nightmare, I didn't realize this until this week. But there's this tornado that you see when he first falls asleep, and Charlie is dreaming of hell, I should clarify. Mm-hmm. And he's feeling guilty because he's left heaven. He knows he can't go back to heaven. And so he has a dream, and he's dreaming of the bad place, the worst place. There's a tornado just early on that kind of sucks him in, and you see it in the distance, and then you see it kind of come up upon him, and it sucks him up and can't be prevented, essentially. Mm-hmm. I remember at one point we had plans in this podcast to talk about each week, things we were afraid of or nightmares that we had, whatever. I think we are doing that, just playing into all the stories, right? Which is cool. I have nightmares of that exact tornado.
Really?
And have for my entire life.
Did you know that it was from this?
I had no idea.
Wow.
I had no idea it was from this movie.
Wow.
But I regularly have nightmares about tornadoes. Sometimes they're in the distance, like that one was. Sometimes they're really close. But I have dreamt about tornadoes dozens and dozens of times over the years.
I've had a lot of tornado nightmares too, but I thought mine came from Twister.
Twister, I like Twister as well. So it could be.
That could be. I had a very severe fear of storms.
Yeah.
It was like a phobia almost of storms, but now it's my favorite thing in the world.
I wasn't really afraid of storms, but tornadoes.
Yeah. That just sort of, they go hand in hand in my mind.
And I could always imagine seeing them. I think it was partially that, the anticipation that we keep talking about, the idea that the other shoe's going to drop, the idea that something bad is coming, that dread, that's a theme throughout this movie. That's been a theme throughout my life.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of a tornado in the distance means you're either going to see something destroyed or you yourself are going to experience destruction.
Right. It's never good.
And it's this weird, I don't know, in my mind, there was a connection. And when I saw the tornado as Charlie falls asleep, I was like, I dreamed that. And then I thought it was interesting too, because it's technically a nightmare for Charlie as well. And I was like, what in my little 6-year-old mind said, that's what a nightmare is? and just like took it and put it in.
Gift to myself.
Yeah, I don't know, but dude,
that's wild.
I had to pause the movie and like look at the frames of the scene, and it was just insane to me. I think that is one of the examples on this podcast that's going to be most prominent for me in terms of like what I remember and what has stuck with me. So there's the tornado, and then you get to hell. And so the whole sequence involves this like pretty much unbridled demonic activity. There's these little demons running around wreaking havoc.
Right.
You see the magma of hell. It's like the center of the earth, which we don't actually know what's in the center of the earth, by the way. Speaking about not knowing things. We have no idea. It's crazy, the things that we actually don't know, but things that were almost presented as fact in like science class.
You didn't know? Hell is beneath our feet.
Right.
That's why when the earth opens up and you can fall into the pit, you go to hell.
Exactly.
Heaven is up above us. Hell is down below us.
Sure.
You didn't know that?
This is the common depiction in society, especially Western society. I should speak probably exclusively to Western society because I did not grow up with any kind of Eastern influence. Might be better off if I had, but
only, right? That's for your adult life.
Right. But the core of the earth, we're taught with all this magma and everything, you know, and that's kind of what we see. Yeah. So you're immediately feeling the hell vibes right off the bat.
Hell vibes. Hashtag
hell vibes. So this Satan, presumably, is this dragon creature. It's a skeleton first, then it becomes like it's evolved, it's a weird,
misshapen sort of creature. It's not very clear.
Yeah, which almost makes it worse to me because it's conceptual.
It's like a shadow buried in flame. It's like this weird. Yeah, it is like a doggish, dragonish kind of thing. I saw it as a big dog with wings.
Sure, yeah, because it's dog heaven and dog hell.
Right.
The angel in heaven was like a whippet. Right. Yeah, it's dog heaven. So this is dog Satan.
Dog Satan.
It looks dragon-like, but it's got the wings. And honestly, in the animations, especially the ones that were cut out, you can really see like an odd resemblance to Pete's dragon.
Oh, I see.
Because they, they were made by both Don Bluth. But
right.
So yeah, you've got this Satan character taking Charlie for his own and locking him away for all eternity. The word eternity still triggers me. Yes. Did very much so as a child as well. But, you know, we learn, he sees this, he's attacked by these little demon creatures, he's trying to escape. And we find, you know, he wakes up and we realize that this was just a dream. He's not actually in hell.
Right.
Never mind the fact that the dream was triggered by his own, like, visceral guilt.
Yeah.
Which is super relatable.
You know what he needs? He needs some therapy.
Charlie, you need some serious therapy, as does Anne Marie.
Oh, God. Bless her heart.
As do I, and that's why I'm in therapy. Because when you're taught from, like, early childhood, toddlerhood, you're a toddler, and you're being told from that early age that hell is a literal, real place that exists, and you know that inherently because you have all this internalized guilt at 4 or 5 years old, so you know that, obviously, if you do bad things, you'll go to a bad place. And then this is your first visualization of hell. This is your first glimpse of what it is supposed to look like or be like. Yeah. I can't overstate the trauma of that.
Right.
Knowing that hell is a real place and then seeing it presented to you as a kid.
And we're able to accept it as children. If you're sitting here thinking like, oh, there's no way you would be able to understand that as a kid. The reason why we could accept hell as a very real, literal place is because, one, when you grow up in a culture like that, you have no choice but to believe what you're told, right? That's
right.
Part of being a kid.
Well, you don't know that any other possibility could exist.
Yeah, you don't know of anything else, but you also understand punishment very well.
Yes.
You do something bad, you get punished.
Like hierarchy and authority is very early.
Exactly.
Like, also established very early.
So when you take this like personal, parent-child relationship, you do bad, you're going to get punished. Then when you expand that into a philosophical concept in your childlike brain of like, life and death scenarios, like, well, you do bad things, you're a bad person, You'll be punished eternally.
Right.
Right. You'll have this hell experience. Mm-hmm. So you were able to sort of take your small concept of being punished for being bad, but you put in timeout. So pretend like you're in timeout, but it hurts forever.
Yeah.
You're in pain forever in timeout.
Yeah.
But you're like on fire. And you're like, oh my God.
And the thing is, our brains, I don't think, are meant to comprehend or understand that. But as a child, you may not be able to fathom eternity, but that makes it worse. Like, you just recognize that there will never be an end to this. And it's really haunting.
That's just a scary thought.
And not only that, but because it's so difficult to wrap a brain around, adult, child, or otherwise, because it's so difficult, and because you're in church 3 times a week or whatever, Bible studies, et cetera, it's presented to you often. And because it's such a troubling thought, you are constantly replaying it, trying to make sense of it. Yeah. That was my experience with just that trauma. Like I was reintroducing it to my mind all the time.
Can't fall asleep at night because all you're thinking about is heaven versus hell and how do you get to either or. It's a lot.
Oh, in the words of Marty McFly, it's heavy. So, yeah. Speaking of heavy, so I've gone through, out of order, but still, I've gone through a lot of the darkness of the film. And once it gets to this point in the movie, when Itchy comes back, really is the point when Itchy comes back and the casino's destroyed. That's the point that I remember when I got to be 10, 11, I would turn off the movie. Like, I wouldn't watch the end.
Really?
Yeah, because it just got to be too much. And I always kind of went into it thinking, it'll be fine. Much like I did this week. Yeah. And then I get to that point and I have all of these triggers of my that very specific to me doom feeling. Yep. Once I've hit a few of those hurdles, this is the point where I'm like, can't do it.
Yeah.
So I kept going for you guys, but I didn't want to.
Did it for you.
And I think part of it too, especially this time, was I could feel myself feeling it as a child. I know what it felt like to me as a child. I'm a little more, like I keep saying, I'm just ever so slightly more liberated in my thinking now.
Yeah.
Not as like stuck in that repetitive cycle of this way of thinking. But I can feel 5-year-old Kaylin feeling it, and that makes me cry.
Yeah.
That makes me hurt because I was so young. I believed it so wholeheartedly.
Right.
So sincerely. Like, you talk about sincere. I was just the most sincere child.
Even seeing pictures of you as a kid makes me sad.
Right. I was really sad. Just a sad kid. I had all this weight on me all the time. All the time. And so watching it back, I'm literally tearing up right now.
Yeah.
Like, watching it back, I could just feel myself feeling as a child, and I just wanted to, like, give myself a hug because it was so dark for me. It was such a dark thing.
Those feelings, that's a prison that
my parents were there for me. They didn't, I wouldn't say my parents neglected me. You know, I talked to them about hell a lot. We talked through it, but they're still coming at it from this Christian perspective.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, you can't get comfortable. You can't have comfort when hell is a possibility if you're my personality. If you have those anxious tendencies, if you always focus on a worst case scenario, it's impossible to ever be comfortable.
No, yeah, this is a prison that we were born into, and it was perpetuated by the inmates.
Yeah.
Like, you have to get to a point where you accept it as a reality.
Yeah.
You're in this doom. You're either on death row or maybe one day you'll get out.
Yep.
If you're lucky. Like,
that's a really great summary.
You can't escape it.
You're always on death row.
You might be pardoned.
And you have the possibility that you might be pardoned, but you don't know.
You don't know for certain.
And that is the way that you live every second of every day.
All you can do is be on your best behavior and
hope.
Maybe somebody will notice eventually.
And I'm not saying that all Christians feel like this or believe this. I'm not trying to generalize a whole like belief system here, but speaking from my experience and the very legalistic world that I grew up in, it's so much pressure that it is no wonder that so many people my age are like broken and coming into therapy thinking like, how do I ever reconcile this?
Yeah.
I went through it. I've gone through it for the past several years. Like, it's just...
Me too.
It's really, really hard to reconcile to life and just existing on a daily basis.
Yep.
And then when you're older, you know, you've gone through puberty, you have all the hormones that you're going to have for the rest of your life. When you already have disorders such as anxiety and depression, it's just almost impossible to function. And I know I feel like it sounds like I'm just exaggerating, and this is... I know I'm sitting here talking on a podcast about 90s nostalgia and all dogs go to heaven, but this was my experience with this movie.
Yeah. So
just being honest, that's all I can do.
You're not the only one.
Oh, man. If you felt this way too, reach out to me. Let's cry together. It's a lot. So
yeah.
Going back to the movie, we do get like this 101 Dalmatians comes to my mind because Flo, who was the caretaker for the puppies in the sharing song, you know, she's the one that was like crushing on Charlie. And it's kind of debated too, like what Charlie's history was there. Like it's the orphanage for the puppies was in an abandoned church. Mm-hmm. So this place of safety was a church, which I think was on purpose.
Yeah.
Flo is there, and you get the impression, you know, she's like, you never come around anymore. So is Charlie, like, was this an orphanage where Charlie grew up? Somebody was talking about on the internet, like joking, like, was Charlie like the deadbeat dad? And like, this is his litter of puppies. Like, I don't think they intended that.
I wouldn't say that. I got the impression that he was an orphan too.
Yeah, me too.
That's just the vibe I got.
He came from this orphanage. That's what I felt too.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's Flo. Flo comes back. She shows up to save the day and wants Itchy to go track down the couple that Anne-Marie was taken in by.
Right.
Because at this point, Anne-Marie had run off. She ran off from Charlie when she found out he was using her. She ran away and was kidnapped by Carface. So Itchy and Flo are going to come to the rescue. Somehow Flo knows the address of these people and where they live.
Right.
We had their ID. We had their wallet because Charlie pickpocketed their wallet.
Yeah.
But I don't know if Flo ever saw it. I digress. But they know that their only hope at this point are adult humans. They can fix this, which is kind of a funny parallel to me as well. Like, you just get mixed up in all this stuff. It's just the dogs and the kids.
Right.
And then you need an adult to step in and actually fix it. And now we are the adults. And that's just a whole other level of psychologically tough. But we find that Carface has Anne-Marie in a cage. Yep, a human person in a cage, literal cage. She's suspended over the water, and Carface tries to kill Charlie again by tying him to an anchor and dropping him into the bayou. So Charlie is drowning, presumably, but Charlie screams. Again, we mentioned this earlier, the alligator does come and save him. So thanks, Mr. Alligator. This was your good deed, in addition to like not killing Charlie in the first place.
Right.
But through this weird sequence, Anne-Marie falls, the cage falls. She's now floating in the water, and then gasoline somehow spills and ignites this like furnace that's in this abandoned place where they all are. So now you have this scenario where they're on the water, but there's gasoline on the water, so the water's on fire.
Was it like oil or is it gasoline?
Oh, oil. Yeah, I don't know. But it's something flammable.
It's flammable liquid in the bayou. Yeah, so everything's on fire. It's very hellfire.
Yes. And in my like memory of this, I had a really hard time separating out this moment from the hell nightmare, because to me it all felt so hellish. The hellfire, the peril, like it's just, you're either going to burn or you're going to drown, which are two ways that I pray I never die.
Yeah, those are two of the ways,
Two of the most horrible deaths to die.
For sure.
And so you have both of these threatening you. And the music is swelling. Obviously, the music, I didn't really touch on that earlier. The score, I feel like, is great. Whereas the soundtrack, the music with the lyrics needs some help. But the score of the movie really is probably another reason why I get so emotional.
It's very good.
But you've got the swelling music, and it's blurring together with hell in my mind. And I just feel like they could have removed like 4 layers of complication or like peril from this scene, and it would still be a scary scene.
Yeah.
Like they didn't have to do everything. I don't know what writer or what pitch or why they just decided to make it fire, water, gangster, alligator,
as perilous as possible.
By the way, Anne-Marie still has pneumonia.
Yeah, she's still sick.
She's still sick and feverish in this whole sequence. So just pick one. Like pick one. It doesn't have to be all of them.
Yeah.
But of course, Charlie does drown in this scene, dying a second time. It's one of, I feel like, probably very few children's movies where the protagonist dies twice. And he dies because he gives up this watch, that we've been hearing tick this whole time. He lets it fall in order to save Anne-Marie because he realizes he can't do both.
He's given that choice.
In my mind, why didn't you just put the watch on? But like, that's the same thing as Titanic. Like, could Jack have gotten onto the door with Rose? These are the choices that are made in a finale of a movie, but still, it is presented like a choice. Like you said, he can either save the watch or he can save Anne-Marie. And although he's been self-serving for this entire movie, he gives up himself, saves Anne-Marie.
Yeah.
The magnitude of that decision was so heavy to me as a child because I knew that he was, the audience, not just me, we know he's choosing between saving her and eternal damnation.
Right.
There is no heaven anymore in his scenario. So it's like,
he can never go back.
He can either save this girl or avoid eternal damnation. But the flip side of that is it's ticking. It's inevitable.
He's still going to die eventually.
It's going to happen to him eventually. And maybe this is what weighs into his decision in saying it's time to think about somebody else.
Right.
So he does save Anne-Marie. I can't imagine anything worse than this moment for Charlie and this feeling. And every single time I've watched this movie from this point forward, my heart is in my throat. Just like everything is tight and it hurts. And I understand that that's how like a climax of a film should feel. But just not to that extent for the age that I was. And it just,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't know that it should have felt the way that it did, because we're going to watch our main character be damned for eternity.
Right.
This brings us to what I called in my notes the grand finale of terror. So Charlie returns briefly to say goodbye to Anne-Marie. The whole scene is resolved. Anne-Marie is now safe and sound, recovering at home, presumably with that couple in her bed. Itchy is curled up asleep next to her, which also breaks my heart for so many reasons.
He climbs up onto the bed.
I almost can't think about this scene. Like, I almost can't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I've watched it a handful of times being older than like 10 years old, and it's, again, almost unwatchable.
This is the scene where I teared up.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people do. I was full on sobbing.
Yeah, I got choked up.
So this is the penultimate scene of the movie. You see Satan, this creature. He's like covered in lava again.
Massive.
Huge. Just really, really threatening and really awful. But you see him. He overtakes the whole city of New Orleans in this like cloud of red smoke. And Charlie's ghost, he's permitted to like leave hell. He can leave the torment for just a brief moment to say goodbye to Anne-Marie, the person that he saved.
How you feeling, kid?
Okay, how are you?
Well, I come to say goodbye.
Where are you going?
Just on a little trip.
It is devastating beyond
I
words.
know.
Devastating.
Yes.
Oh, this scene has haunted me over the years more than anything else in children's media, hands down. This scene is the worst for me. Like, I'm sure we'll discuss a lot of bad things, but this was the worst for me.
Yeah.
Because you have this emptiness. It's weird because you have this really big, energetic climax of the movie, but that's all sucked out from under you, and it's just silence and emptiness. You hear the wind blowing.
Yeah.
It's hollow. It's hopeless. There is no hope to be found.
Yeah. Nothing left.
This is the scariest thing to me. Maybe in general, like in film in general, like maybe beyond children's media, like it is so unsettling to me, and I can't properly articulate how unsettling. And when, your mind is being pumped full of how terrible hell will be 3 times a week plus, it's indescribable.
Yeah.
And so then you're imagining Charlie in hell, and like even if he is like gaslighting, greedy, like pig of a dog, it's not a fun thing to imagine a character that burning in hell.
Right.
And then we find out, in my opinion, a little too late, or a lot too late, that Charlie's good deed of sacrificing himself has absolved him of his sins, and he's able to go back to heaven.
Yeah, why it took until this moment? Why wasn't it like immediate? I don't know.
It should have just been instant. And it's like, oh wait, you can go to heaven instead. And then the credits roll or something.
He had to come back to Earth to be granted permission to go back to heaven.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange sequence, but it's because I'm sure they wanted to draw this scene, and it is beautifully drawn.
It's definitely nice.
I don't ever want to watch it again if I can help it. The goodbye is too heart-wrenching, and like the angel just comes back too late. It's already damaged me so deeply emotionally that it's really hard to come back from that. And they don't do a great, like, it's so hurried at the end once it is revealed that he can go to heaven. It's real quick. And so the long, drawn out devastation is still hanging there. And then they just quickly say, never mind. And that's the end.
Yeah.
It's just more than pretty dark to me. They didn't do enough to fix the feelings.
Yeah.
To help you like smile when you're walking out of the movie.
No, because when a movie ends like that and it still ends in death, that separation, that longing, that forever, eternity.
Oh, true. Yeah. He's still dead.
There's no coming back from that. He's still dead.
Yeah.
He's not coming back.
He's still dead. There is still that separation. You're totally right. So it doesn't fix everything.
It still ends on this hollow, empty note.
Yeah, you nailed it. You nailed it.
It's so sad.
So sad.
Goodbye, little buddy.
Oh, Charlie, I'll miss you.
I think the thing that really bothered me most about this scene is that every time Charlie did one of his worst things to Anne-Marie, she still like forgave him and always chose to love him regardless. It's that like childlike innocence of she's always going to forgive him. Even at the end when he shows up here as a ghost, she's happy to see him.
I know.
And she's like, well, where are you going? And so that's what bothered me most, is that she's going to wake up the next day and not know why he isn't there.
Charlie, will I ever see you again?
Sure you will, kid. Goodbyes aren't forever.
Then, goodbye, Charlie. I love you.
She loves him. So she has to wake up with that reality that her dog is dead. And it's so
in
heartbreaking.
the best case, that's still what's going on.
That's best case scenario.
Oh, I'm just so torn up about it. I spent a week living in this trauma in order to make my notes and like make this make sense. And
you exposed yourself to the trauma.
Yeah. And I mean, this scene is one of the reasons that I wanted to make this podcast, actually, because I think it's important to like give our generation the chance to talk through the trauma, like we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
And to kind of commiserate on it and learn about like how we've grown or how we're growing. It brought up a lot for me, and I cried a whole lot this week. But I think on the whole, it was important to do that. So thanks, guys, for giving me the space to experience it and share it with you. It means a lot to me.
You give yourself that space.
I guess so. We learn as we move beyond that scene in like the credits scene that like Carface gets his comeuppance because he's also in heaven, because all dogs go to heaven. Even Carface goes to heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah. The alligator apparently took care of Carface. So
yeah, but you see him like take his watch.
Yeah.
And she's like, but you can never come back. Same. You know, now it's kind of silly.
But yeah, it becomes silly out of nowhere. And you're like, but the vibe was not silly.
No.
We were not in a silly vibe for this entire movie. And you're going to go silly now? And
then Charlie's like, oh, he'll be back.
Yeah.
You know, like
grabs his halo.
It is this like, oh, you know what? All dogs do go to heaven because eventually you find your way.
Yeah.
Here. And it's almost like this, like you give yourself enough chances, or you're given enough chances that you do get to redeem yourself.
Yeah, which is great. It just comes a little too late.
But if all dogs go to heaven, why is there a dog hell? Why is it
Why does it even
Why
exist?
Is there a dog devil?
Great question. These are the philosophical things that we wonder. I asked myself that this week too. I was like, why was there a hell to go to? If not heaven, it should just be earth, right? Endlessly as a ghost.
It's almost like that's a really good question we should be asking about our human existence. It's almost like, why would there even be that?
Why would that even exist if the hope is that no one has to go there?
Right.
Oh, buddy. So, yeah. Like I mentioned, obviously we're not the first people on the internet to discuss this film.
We're not.
And I did look at some other people's like thoughts and opinions, and I feel like nobody seemed quite as impacted by all the religious content as I was. But it's still astounding to me, like the consensus of the way that this film did sit with people and the way that it had an impact on the millennial psyche in general. Some opinions that I like uncovered, people were talking about how they recognized the older that they got that this was like kind of a macabre like fascination, because this movie was sad and it was disturbing and it was dark.
Very dark.
And nobody could stop watching it. I hear a cat. Sorry, one of my cats is yelling.
Oh, I hear
I feel your pain, kitty. I know.
Do all cats go to heaven?
All cats go to heaven. Don't worry about it, babies. You will go to heaven for sure. Oh, they're still yelling. That's Buzz. I think he probably just like woke up and was like, wait, where are you? I hear your voice.
Talking to somebody.
Oh, that's Phoebe. Tiny. But everybody collectively seemed to have recognized that this movie was disturbing. They were disturbed by it in some way.
Yep.
But they continued to watch them. Over and over.
It.
They would rewind it
bunch.
And watch it again and again, and I did the same thing. And that's true of a lot of the darker things that we consumed as kids, and I think it started really early for our generation, this like fascination with that darkness.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other main reasons we're here. So to go into a psychology direction for a second, I've looked this up before, but I wanted to make it make sense in this context. And according to like psychologists.
According to the psychologists.
All humans kind of have an inability to like look away from disaster. We all have that like morbid curiosity, it's called.
Right.
And it's actually like a survival instinct. That's why it exists evolutionarily speaking in our mind and the way that humans exist.
Right.
Because we're programmed to like seek out as much information as we possibly can on like potential disasters and grim scenarios and anything that would result in our demise or us dying.
Well, anything to do with death, we've always been fascinated as a race of people.
As a culture,
the first morgues were like viewing houses. You could just go walk through and just look at bodies.
Oh, that's crazy.
We used to have public executions. I mean, we've always been drawn to it. We've always been fascinated. And not only is that something that you naturally grow into as a human, but we were spoon-fed it in our entertainment as children.
Yes.
We were the first generation to really be given that, besides morbid fairy tales.
We were given it in our entertainment because the people that were making the entertainment were also grappling with it themselves.
I mean, we've always liked scary stories and, tales with morals like, if you're good, Santa Claus will bring you gifts. And if not, you'll get a lump of coal.
Yep.
Or the boogeyman's going to get you if you're bad.
It's this binary thinking, good versus evil.
Be good or bad things will happen to you.
And sometimes if you are good, bad things happen. And how do you explain that?
Guess what? Bad things still happen to good people.
But to hit you with some psychology quotes, I found an NBC article. There was a study published by the American Psychological Association, as my cat wails in the background, and they found that we react to and learn from our negative experiences more than we do our positive experiences, which, yeah, same. That's something that I have noticed in my life.
For sure.
Very strongly. They said humans are prone to negative bias and negative potency. It was a psychologist, Renee Carr, that was talking about it, Dr. Renee Carr, and she said negative bias is the tendency to automatically give more attention to a negative event and negative information than positive information or events, which summary of my being. But that's because psychologically, negative events activate our brains more. So it makes sense to me why we seek them out.
Well, there's that weird, masochistic tendency toward I'm never happy unless I'm unhappy kind of thing.
It is, I think it's Baudelaire that's like, I can't conceive of a joy in which I can't conceive of a beauty in which there is no melancholy.
Right. Exactly.
And that speaks to my soul because I'm like, yeah.
When I'm happiest, I'm suspicious.
Yeah, same.
I get weirdly sad when I'm happy because I'm like, I don't deserve this. Something's wrong.
I think we've also talked about it before. Like I cry, not necessarily cry, but I always get upset around my birthday.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Partially because aging, but even as a kid, I did it and I didn't really have a concept of, here I am saying I didn't have a concept of aging when I was a kid and death. Of course I did, but you're supposed to also be excited. A birthday party, presents, fun stuff.
I hate birthdays.
I got so upset as a kid around my birthday.
Holidays depress me. The only one that doesn't depress me is Halloween.
Halloween.
That's it.
Me too.
Around holidays, I get so depressed.
Same. A lot of people do. This is not a unique experience, but that's because of many of these things.
And I've told you some of the best things that have ever happened to me. The times in my life where I've been doing my best, I feel the worst. I can't accept it.
Negative potency.
I'm so potently negative.
Negative potency describes the higher amount of psychological arousal that is experienced when a person is exposed to a negative or traumatic event compared with a positive event.
This is why I'm my happiest at funerals, despite hating them.
I wouldn't say I'm my happiest at funerals.
I hate funerals, but
obviously it makes sense to me that this instinct was strong in me as I was very anxious as a child. So it makes sense to me that I would watch the negative things because I was desperate to foresee and prevent tragedy however I possibly could. I've told you before, I had a bag packed every single night because I was afraid there would be a fire. From the time I was 5 years old, I was always preparing to circumvent tragedy however I possibly could. And so it makes total sense that I would be seeking out information about it to learn how to prevent it. And I think it makes sense for us as a generation. We have a lot of mental health struggles, anxiety struggles. Generally, we're a pretty reactive generation because we're reacting to generations of this unhealed trauma, undiscussed trauma, undiagnosed personality disorders, et cetera, going back for generations. So it's all landing on us, as we've talked about, and makes sense that we would consume dark stuff.
Right.
But it also, you find yourself in kind of a chicken or egg scenario when it comes to, ooh, my cat, she wants in here so bad. Can you hear her?
I do.
You find yourself in a chicken or egg scenario coming to entertainment purposes, because as much as I do think I was subconsciously seeking out ways to prevent problems, I also think that the repetitive consumption of the information, I don't think it ever really left me feeling more prepared. I think in most cases it made me more anxious.
Yeah.
I just didn't know it consciously.
Right.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of these films were kind of born from that same sort of instinct in the generations before us. And maybe they had their own subconscious desire to better understand tragedy and how they could overcome it. Mm-hmm. But I think we'll get into this kind of discussion a lot more often. So
probably
I'll try to leave it there. But it made sense to me in the context of this movie for sure.
Yeah, big time.
So in terms of All Dogs Go to Heaven, there was a sequel released in 1996, which was a very common occurrence in the mid-90s to make sequels of animated films, and I watched all of them. The sequel might get its own episode one day because I think it had equally interesting themes.
Yeah, probably.
And a lot more of a suggestive slant to it also.
Ooh, all right.
But this movie also had, it spawned a short running, there was an animated series. I don't know if you remember it, but there's also an All Dogs Christmas Carol.
No.
With all of these characters. Carface is Scrooge.
That sounds about right.
They released several computer games with it.
Okay.
And when I read that, I was like, fever dream. I've oh my, like it just came back to me in a rush. So if it rings a bell for you, listener, go look up a playthrough on YouTube, because it is like, it's so crazy to see and hear those sounds again and be like, I remember this from when I was like 4 or 5.
Wow.
But after this film, Don Bluth went on to direct Rockadoodle in 92.
Rockadoodle.
And he did Thumbelina.
Oh my God.
Yes. Troll in Central Park, and The Pebble and the Penguin.
Okay.
I loved The Pebble and the Penguin, but the internet considers all of these failures. They were failures at the box office. They didn't do great. But he did get one more hit when he worked with Fox on Anastasia in 1997.
Okay.
Apparently, he's still passionate about animation, and as of 2020, when I was looking at it, he's slated to produce a film that's based on Dragon's Lair.
Oh, wow.
But it's kind of in flux because of COVID and everything, but that may be coming.
Cool.
So in conclusion, number 1, thanks for sticking with us through all of this. Everything that we had to work through today with All Dogs Go to Heaven. It clearly left its mark on our generation, and I've been excited to discuss this one ever since we decided to make a podcast, because I have trouble separating out, like, what about my experience with this film is, like, my current self, as I was talking about, like, mourning and feeling sad for, like, the smaller version of me who, like, felt every feeling in this movie so deeply.
Yes.
I don't know what is me that's still working through a lot of that early life trauma and guilt around hell and death and everything, or what parts are just constructed for me with the animation and the music and the plot, because it's all there. It's plenty enough to bother somebody, even, like I said, if you didn't grow up the way that we did. So
yeah.
I don't know what it's exactly is happening still, but it's a lot. I am messed up for weeks after I watched this movie. I have been every time I've watched it as an adult. So again, you're welcome. I did it for you. I pushed through and I watched it, and
yeah,
I am come out on the other side.
I was mostly just mortified while watching it.
Yeah.
It's like, geez, this is not for kids.
It's not. It's just not. I also wanted to throw this in here. Guess what?
What?
They don't say the word hell ever in the entire movie.
That's true.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It's all power of just cultural suggestion.
It's just the not heaven.
It's just the not heaven, but they don't even say that much.
Interesting.
They say heaven, but they never say hell.
Interesting.
I am the kind of person, I watch murder documentaries all the time and horror movies, talking about that bias from earlier, probably, like trying to prevent problems. But I genuinely don't think it will be good for my mental health if I ever watch this movie again. I genuinely don't think I will if I can help it.
Wow. It's a big statement.
Yeah, and I feel it in my bones. One of very few titles that I have that very, like, certain visceral trauma that I feel comfortable, because I feel like uncomfortable taking up space in places where people are hurt and things like that, because I know I have it a lot easier and a lot better than a lot of other people. I'm fully aware of my privilege in that way.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. I know that I had it easy in comparison, so I have trouble claiming trauma sometimes, but I'll claim this one.
You should.
Like, the film has always spoken to me for better or worse, and that's why we're here, is to talk through that. So thank you, Christian, for enduring my texts, my chaotic texts all week about all the notes I was taking and everything that I was learning. And
no, I'm happy to learn. It was awesome.
I appreciate everybody's patience and commiseration.
I've been excited about hearing it because it's been such a big, like, anticipation, big buildup in my mind.
Man.
Yeah. But that's one of the important things, not to get back on the tangent, but one of the important things about trauma and mental health is that, like, it doesn't belong to anyone. Nobody deserves a certain kind of trauma or experience. Like, we all have it. That's the thing, is it's not selective. Like, it doesn't pick and choose who it affects. We all have it for different reasons. Yeah. Everybody has something.
Everyone has trauma.
And so it's important to accept that you have it. Just because you might have life a little bit easier doesn't mean it doesn't affect you.
Yeah.
It just,
I get so aggravated when people invalidate their own trauma by saying other people have it worse, but I do it too. Right. I just did it. I'm very guilty of it. It's really hard growing up the way that we did, not to just, be the martyr, ignore your own
We're told people have
trauma.
it worse than you, so you should be thankful and grateful for everything.
You should just be thankful and grateful for everything always.
So even if you're miserable, you should, suck it up and just, be grateful.
Well, rejoice in your suffering.
Yeah, well, that's one of the points from earlier I didn't make, was that, we idolize martyrdom. Yeah. We idealized it in our faith and in the church and everything. So we were happy in our suffering. We were told to suffer and be happy about it. Be miserable.
And a lot of people are, to some degree, which is really tough from a, like, scientific brain chemistry point of view.
And yet it makes so much sense. I don't know why. It's crazy. But yeah. So thanks for teaching us everything about your experience with this movie. And sorry that it affected you so much.
Yeah, me too.
But I'm glad you have this outlet.
I did. I'm grateful for the outlet for sure. Man, well, this was a heavy, hard-hitting episode.
Real heavy.
We'll hit you next time. I don't know how hard we'll hit you next time, but I know that this was probably the hardest hitting.
It won't be this hard.
Hopefully won't be.
We'll take it easy.
We'll try to go easy.
Yeah.
That was chaos.
Cool. Well, thanks for sticking around toward the end, everybody.
I'm like, my brain is just soup now.
Your brain is soup. You got it all out. Now it's just mushy.
I got it all out, and it's just mushy up there.
I hear you. Cool. Well, thanks, guys. Have a good week. I know we're all mourning the end of the Halloween season, but the spooky season continues all the way through winter, because honestly, that's the true spooky season. Is winter. That's the season of ghosts. Yeah. But we're gonna keep it spooky.
We're gonna stay spooky
forever
here.
And ever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
You never come back.
Thanks for listening to That's Pretty Dark, written and produced by Christian Baxter Mott and Kaylin Andrews.
Our music is composed by Jonathan Simmons, and our art is provided by Paige Garland at Power Girl Illustration. Join the collective nostalgia and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at That's Pretty Dark Podcast. Share your experiences and let us know what shows, films, or villains still haunt you from childhood at that'sprettydarkpodcast@gmail.com. Remember, you're never really alone. So, until next time, sweet dreams, everyone.